Right in the middle of a crowded conference room, I heard my son's father-in-law, Randall Pierce, shout straight into his face, "This kid can't even hold a damn mop the right way. Useless. Absolutely useless." People burst out laughing. I froze at the doorway, staring at my son, Noah, kneeling on the floor, his hands trembling as he wiped up the coffee Randall had deliberately tossed just to teach him a lesson. Noah saw me. His face flushed a deep, painful red. I wanted to run in and pull him away, but I stayed still. And in those few seconds, I understood. If I reacted now, they would crush him even further. So I swallowed my anger and turned away. And in that very moment, I decided I would make them pay for what they did. But in a way they would never see coming. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I walked out of the Pierce Manufacturing Building, my hands clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. The North Carolina air that day was colder than usual for December. But the chill of the wind was nothing compared to the cold running down my spine after watching my son treated like cheap labor in front of a room full of people. I, Margaret Maggie Turner, 66 years old, never imagined I would have to see Noah in such a state, especially after the years I spent pouring every ounce of strength I had into raising and protecting him. I remembered standing there, watching my only son in that wide conference room, the walls lined with oversized posters about the company's vision and mission. Ironically, beneath those shiny slogans, my son was kneeling on the floor like an untrained janitor, scrubbing spilled coffee. I already knew Noah hadn't been given the management position he was originally promised. But I never expected they would treat him this horribly. I can still see the moment Noah's eyes met mine by accident. The hurt in them pierced straight through my chest. I'd seen him fall off his bike, seen him get injured, seen him cry over his first heartbreak. But never had I seen humiliation in his eyes this deep. It was as if he was silently saying, "Mom, I'm sorry you have to see me like this." I wanted to tell him he had nothing to apologize for, that the only wrongdoers were the people trampling him to feed their own swollen egos. But I couldn't do anything from the hallway. Any reaction from me would give Randall another excuse to shame Noah. So I turned my back and walked away. But I swear, that was the last time in my life I would ever walk away from my son in a moment like that. When I got home, I opened the lunch I had brought for Noah, a box of Southern-style barbecue rice, the family recipe he'd loved since he was little. I thought it would make his first day a little easier. I had woken up at 6 a.m., prepared everything with care. I wanted him to have a real lunch, not some rushed fast food at the office. I had imagined him walking into Randall's company with confidence, being respected, being recognized for who he was. But what I saw was the opposite of everything I had hoped. I set the lunchbox on the kitchen counter and sat there for a long time. My house in Raleigh had always felt warm, filled with the scent of old wood and family photos lining the walls. But that day, the whole place felt dark. I could hear my heartbeat, slow, angry, heavy. At 66, I lived alone, used to the silence of a house no longer filled with the footsteps of a little boy running around. But today, the silence roared like a scream. I thought about all the years I raised Noah on my own. My husband left when Noah was 4. I worked 3 jobs, waitressing at a diner, cleaning hotel rooms, and doing temp work in a warehouse just to provide for him. I used to come home close to midnight, hands numb, back aching so badly I cried. But the moment I saw Noah asleep, hugging his worn-out teddy bear, everything felt worth it. Noah never disappointed me. He was hard-working, gentle, polite, always saying please and thank you to everyone he met. When he got into the University of North Carolina, I cried in the middle of the campus because I was so proud, and now those people dared call my son useless. No, I would not accept that. That evening, I called Noah again and again, but he didn't answer. I guessed he was embarrassed, or worse, blaming himself. I knew my son better than anyone. Noah always endured first, stayed silent second, and fell apart last. I'd seen it during his first divorce 6 years ago, and now it was happening again. I paced around the house like a wounded lioness. I opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a small notebook, the blue one with worn edges. I wrote, December 12th, Randall Pierce publicly humiliated Noah in front of the staff, deliberately spilled coffee to make him kneel and clean the floor. I didn't know what made me do it. Maybe instinct, maybe the experience of a single mother who'd seen too much bitterness in life. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't just an incident. It was a warning, a sign that my son was being pulled into something dangerous. And if I didn't document everything, I wouldn't be able to protect him. I barely slept that night. The scene at the company played over and over in my mind. The laughter, Noah's terrified eyes, Randall's shouting. But the image that haunted me most was Olivia, standing a few feet away, arms crossed, her face cold and blank, pretending she didn't know the man being humiliated in front of her. I once thought Olivia was simply a little spoiled from growing up wealthy. I told myself differences in social status didn't matter if two people loved each other. But now I had to face the truth. Olivia did not love Noah the way a wife should. She loved control. She loved power, especially the power that came from having a husband who depended on her family. I saw it clearly in the way she stood there, arms folded, not moving an inch to defend him. Near dawn, I sat at the dining table and opened the notebook again. I wrote, "No one has the right to turn Noah into a joke. No one." And beneath that, they think Noah will stay silent. They think I'm old, weak, and powerless. They're wrong. I closed the notebook and exhaled slowly. Life had taught me one thing. The people who seem untouchable are often the easiest to topple, as long as you hit them at the right time, in the right way. Randall and his family looked perfect. Money, power, reputation. But I'd lived long enough to know the shinier the surface, the deeper the cracks underneath. I didn't yet know the full truth. But I knew one thing for sure. They were about to face a storm, one I would create myself. I remember clearly the day Noah first brought Olivia home, a day when I sensed something was off but couldn't put it into words. It was mid-autumn in North Carolina. The driveway was covered in golden leaves like a warm welcome mat. Noah called a few hours before, sounding excited like a man in love, even though he was already over 30. I remember the knock on the door. When I opened it, Olivia stood beside Noah, undeniably beautiful, the kind of beauty that comes from growing up wealthy. Golden hair in soft waves, a beige designer coat, elegant heels, and gray-blue eyes so cold they made you step back a little. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. I greeted her warmly, but a faint uneasiness lingered in my chest. The evening went smoothly, too smoothly. Olivia spoke softly, politely, talking about her work, her family, her goals, but I caught the way she looked at Noah sometimes, analytical, appraising. It bothered me. It was the look of someone examining a project that needed improvement, not a partner she cherished. And Noah, he was trying too hard, too careful with his words, too eager for her approval, too unlike himself. I saw it because I'm his mother. Meeting Randall for the first time happened sooner than I expected. Noah took me to his house, a mansion so large I needed a moment to find the main entrance. Randall greeted me the way a man greets someone he doesn't consider his equal. His handshake was cold, stiff, purely procedural. He looked at my simple cardigan, then at his wife's designer dress. The comparison was obvious. Dinner that night was a string of half-polite, half-patronizing comments. Randall questioned Noah's education, career, income, not to learn, but to highlight Noah's lack. He said Olivia deserved a truly strong man and watched Noah's reaction like it amused him. Noah swallowed hard over and over, trying not to show hurt. I remembered every word. Randall's arrogance wasn't just aimed at me. He looked down on Noah, too. I left that house knowing one thing. If Noah married into this family, he would lose himself. And I was right. Months into dating, Olivia began shaping Noah quietly, not by orders, but by suggestions disguised as care. You should wear suits more. You need to work out so you look confident. You should speak more like business leaders. You have to learn a more professional communication style. Each time Noah tried to comply, he changed the way he talked, the way he dressed, the way he held himself, and he began losing sleep. First occasionally, then constantly. I warned him, told him love wasn't supposed to be an endurance test, but Noah believed the best in people. He believed Olivia loved him. He believed the Pierces just needed time to warm up. I'd lived long enough to know better. Their wedding was extravagant and cold, beautiful like a magazine spread, frozen like marble. I had no part in the decisions. I was simply told where to sit. After the wedding, the Pierces never invited me to dinner, not even once. Noah thought they were busy. I understood the truth. He was theirs now, and I was irrelevant. Then came the financial control. The shared account Olivia managed, the spending restrictions Noah had to discuss with her, and the documents he was pressured to sign for family restructuring. That night, I wrote everything down, every odd detail, every red flag, and I knew something was very wrong. Evil never shows up suddenly. It grows roots, and the roots in the Pierce family were poisonous. What I didn't know then was that Randall was hiding the biggest truth of all. Pierce manufacturing was on the brink of collapse, and I was about to discover it in a way none of them expected. In Noah's first week, Randall assigned him the worst tasks under the guise of training. Moving heavy boxes, pushing carts, running errands on foot between distant buildings. Noah even got injured one afternoon. When I asked if Randall knew, Noah said, "This is how I learn what pressure feels like at the lower levels." A cold shiver ran through me. That's not training, Noah. That's humiliation. But my son only stayed silent. Not long after that, Randall said something to Noah that I will never forget. One evening, while Noah was having dinner with the Pierce family, Randall leaned back in his chair, raised his wine glass, and said with absolute certainty, "If you want to be a son-in-law of this family, you need to know your place." I wasn't there, but Noah told me later when he accidentally let it slip. I asked him what that place was. Noah didn't answer. That silence said everything. I could picture Noah sitting there at a dinner table surrounded by wealthy people, listening to Randall say that with a casual, almost bored tone. I knew my son. He's not the type to get angry easily. He would simply lower his head because he never wants to cause trouble. But people like Randall see that kindness and exploit it. At the company, things grew even worse. It wasn't just Randall who looked down on Noah. Other colleagues began treating him like a servant rather than someone being trained for a management position. Noah told me that every time he walked down the hallway, they whispered, "That's Randall's doorman. That's the precious son-in-law. He only got this job because he married the boss's daughter." Even though Noah tried to recount it jokingly, I still heard the hurt hidden inside every word. I once told Noah, "You don't have to tolerate people who look down on you," but he only gave me that faint smile, the kind you use when you're trying not to collapse. What hurt me most was Olivia, the woman Noah trusted, taking her family's side. Every time Noah complained even a little about what Randall did, Olivia would say in that condescending tone, "You need to be stronger. Men should handle pressure. My dad just wants you to grow up." She called those humiliations lessons for becoming a real man. I wanted to ask her, grow up by kneeling on the floor? Grow up by being called useless in front of employees? But Noah didn't want me confronting Olivia. He said I didn't understand their perspective. He was right. I didn't understand how a wife could calmly watch her husband get trampled. Then one winter night, Noah came to my house in a state I will never forget. It was freezing outside, and Noah stood at my doorway with his coat hanging open, smelling strongly of alcohol. I had never seen my son that drunk. When I helped him into a chair, he burst into tears. Tears like a child's. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. I wish I could disappear." I froze. Noah had never said anything like that in his life. I grabbed his hand, feeling how cold his fingertips were. "Noah, look at me." But he didn't. He only shook his head, tears falling onto my hand, hot and desperate. Noah said he always felt inadequate, that every day at the company was another day he feared hearing those mocking comments, feared making a mistake, feared Randall humiliating him again in front of everyone. He said Olivia told him he was too sensitive, that he needed to grow up. I sat beside my son the entire night, listening to him spill out, through the haze of alcohol, how every day felt like he was being swallowed whole. After that night, I started watching his life closely. I didn't ask aggressively. I didn't pry. I just observed, the way any mother does when she senses something is deeply wrong. And then, one clue after another began to appear. Noah said Randall often handed him documents he needed to review, but whenever Noah brought them to upper management, they looked confused and told him, "You don't have the authority to see these." As if Randall was purposely steering Noah toward dangerous territory, I realized something. Randall didn't want Noah to grow stronger. He wanted Noah to become a liability, a sacrificial lamb. Then one day, Noah said Randall told him to sign off on an inventory report to complete the file, even though Noah didn't work in that department. Noah refused, and Randall shouted right in his face, "You're part of this family. Just sign it." When I heard that, a chill ran down my spine. Randall was steering everything toward one direction. Noah would be the one blamed if the company got into trouble. I wrote in my blue notebook, "Randall is constructing a scapegoat." Every line I wrote made the fear inside me grow heavier. Noah became more and more exhausted. He began working from home on weekends because he was burned out. When I saw his thin face on FaceTime, I saw the unmistakable signs of despair. But Noah still tried to hide everything, still told me everything was fine, still defended Olivia. I knew my son was sliding down a steep hill, one he couldn't stop on his own, and I The mother who carried him through every storm of his childhood could no longer stay still. I swore I would not let them make Noah the fall guy for the Pierce family's sins. I had once fought to keep my child alive through poverty. Now I had to fight again, not against hunger, but against the power of those who looked down on him. That night, while Noah slept on my sofa, completely drained, I stood by the kitchen door, watching the snow fall in the yard. And I felt a different kind of cold, the cold of truth taking shape. I had written down enough in my little notebook, enough to know that what Noah suffered wasn't random, enough to know Randall didn't see Noah as a son-in-law. He saw him as a tool. I closed the notebook, resting my hand on the cover as if sealing a vow. I would not let Randall destroy my child. And the very next morning, I decided it was time to uncover the real condition of Pierce Manufacturing and what they were hiding. I started digging into Pierce Manufacturing on a cold afternoon, right after Noah left my house following a dinner he could barely eat before saying he had to go prepare documents for Randall. I watched him walk out the door, shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. I knew he was almost at his breaking point, and if I didn't act soon, everything would spiral out of control. I didn't know much about big company finance, but I knew I needed someone who could dig into what ordinary people couldn't see. So I called Henry Whitman, an old friend, once a contract attorney in Charlotte. We met years ago when I worked part-time cleaning the law office where he had just started his career. Henry was always direct, discreet, and especially grateful for a small favor I once did for him long ago. When he heard me ask him to investigate Pierce Manufacturing, he stayed silent for a few seconds before saying, "Maggie, are you sure? That's a big corporation, not some small business. I don't care how big it is, I just need to know what they're doing to my son." My voice was calm, but the fury beneath it made Henry stop questioning me. He simply said he would start immediately. A week later, Henry called and asked me to meet him at his office on Sunday afternoon. When I arrived, he was standing near the window, a thick stack of documents on the table. His face was unusually serious enough for me to sense that whatever he was about to say would change everything. "Maggie," he began, "I dug deep, and what I found, no one knows about." I sat down, hands clasped together. "Tell me, Henry." He opened the file and pushed it toward me. The pages were filled with numbers that made my head spin, but Henry summarized it in one sentence. "Pierce Manufacturing is drowning in debt and covering it up with extremely risky accounting tactics." I stared at him, mind blank. Henry continued, "They're being sued by at least 7 companies for breach of contract. They lost 3 major distribution deals. Part of their supply chain has collapsed. A factory in Tennessee shut down completely. And most importantly, Randall has been manipulating the books to hide more than $14 million in losses." It took me a moment to fully grasp what he said. $14 million. Enough to sink a corporation. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "And what does Noah have to do with this?" Henry tightened his grip on his pen. "Randall is setting up a fall guy, and Noah, with his vague job title, unclear authority, and being new, is the perfect candidate." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. "He wants to make my son take the blame?" Henry nodded slowly. "That's what I believe. If the company gets investigated or collapses, Noah will be portrayed as the incompetent signer, the one who approved things he didn't understand. And Randall, he'll stand behind the curtain, untouched." I couldn't speak for several minutes. It felt like someone was crushing my ribs. I feared Randall treated Noah poorly, but I never imagined he was wicked enough to sacrifice my son's future to save himself. "When did Olivia know about this?" I asked. Henry looked at me with sympathy. "She knew. She knew very well. Maggie. Olivia isn't naive. She moves in her father's wealthy social circles. They talk. She knew the company's financial state long ago." A hollow feeling opened inside my chest. "And Noah?" "I am certain he has no idea. If he knew, he wouldn't be able to function." I shook my head, not to deny it, but to keep from crying. And Olivia still stayed silent, letting Noah carry the risk for them. Henry nodded. "They're protecting the family name. If their financial disaster comes out, they need a face. Someone young, inexperienced, unprepared, to take the fall." I closed my eyes. Every word Henry said cut like a blade. From beginning to end, Noah wasn't a son-in-law. He was a living shield for a powerful, ruthless family. After that meeting, I went home and sat by the window for a long time. I looked out at the small garden where Noah used to play when he was little, chasing butterflies, laughing loud enough to wake the neighbors. I remembered every moment I'd worked myself to exhaustion to give him the life he deserved. And now, all he received from his wife's family was contempt and a scheme to turn him into their scapegoat. I knew that if I didn't act, Noah would lose everything: his reputation, his future, even the last pieces of his self-worth. I opened my blue notebook and wrote one more line. Not just saving Noah, tearing down what dragged him to his knees. In that moment, my anger solidified into something fiercer, a pillar, a vow. I decided to do something no one would expect a 66-year-old woman to do. I began building a shell company. I named it Turner Strategic Holdings, something that sounded like a rising investment firm, serious enough and unfamiliar enough to avoid suspicion. I opened a business account, hired an independent accountant, and used my life savings, plus the money from selling an old family house in Virginia, to establish its initial capital. No one knew, not even Noah, and I began to learn. Yes, at 66, I sat in front of a computer taking courses on corporate finance, risk management, and acquisition strategies. I called old friends who once worked in banking. I read about shareholder structures, asset valuation, and negotiation tactics for taking over companies. At first, it felt like wandering through a dense forest of unfamiliar terms, but I remembered the years when I worked 3 jobs just to raise Noah. There was nothing I couldn't do once I decided to. I didn't just want to save Noah. I wanted to destroy the thing that made him kneel on that floor. In the following weeks, I gathered more evidence of Randall's misconduct, from Noah's stories, from Henry's documents, from industry rumors Henry heard. The deeper I dug, the clearer the truth became. Randall Pierce wasn't a businessman. He was a panicked man hiding behind reputation, a man willing to sacrifice anyone, even his own son-in-law, to protect his illusion of power. And if I didn't stop him, Noah would be the first casualty. One evening, while I was reviewing Henry's latest notes, he called me. His voice was lower and slower than usual. "Maggie, I need to say something, and you need to listen carefully." I gripped the phone. "Go ahead, Henry." There was a pause. Then he said a sentence that snapped everything into focus. A sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. "Maggie, if you want to save Noah, you have to defeat Randall in the only place he cares about, his company." I froze. Henry continued. "That's his battlefield, and that's the only place he can be brought down." I rested my hand on the blue notebook and stared at my reflection in the glass. I knew I understood, and I was ready. My fight for Noah began that very moment. If you're listening to this and felt your chest tighten at the thought of a mother watching her child turned into a shield for another's greed, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, or leave even a single line so I know we're walking through this together. From the day Henry said that to save Noah, I had to defeat Randall where he was strongest. I lived with a constant wire pulled tight between determination and fear. I kept a calm face around Noah, but every time I saw him, a deep ache bloomed inside me. My son grew thinner by the week, while Olivia grew more unmasked. Noah started coming to my house more often, not to confide, but because he didn't want to stay home with Olivia. Whenever I saw him standing at my doorway, tired and drained, I knew something else had happened. Olivia no longer hid her contempt. She insulted Noah openly, not just at home, but in front of friends and relatives. One evening, Noah told me that during a dinner with their social circle, Olivia said in front of everyone, "Do you know why my dad is disappointed in you? Because you have no ambition. You're nothing like successful men." She finished speaking. A few people scoffed, and Noah stayed quiet as if her words were simply the truth. I asked him what he did at that moment. Noah just shrugged. "I'm used to it, Mom." Those two words sent a chill down my spine. Day by day, I watched Noah being pushed to the bottom of his own self-worth. He no longer looked people in the eye when speaking. His shoulders were always slumped. His eyes constantly searched for faults in himself. I recognized those signs. I had seen them in women who suffered emotional abuse back in the church group years ago. People who are suppressed long enough eventually stop believing they deserve respect. I feared that one day Noah would reach that point too, and then the thing I feared most happened. It was a rainy night. I was reviewing some of Henry's notes when I heard loud, urgent knocking at the door. I opened it and saw Noah standing there, soaked through, breathless, his eyes red like someone had torn his heart out. I pulled him inside immediately. "Noah, what happened?" He was trembling as he removed his wet coat, and for a few seconds I thought he wouldn't be able to speak at all. Then he took a deep breath, his voice cracking. "She kicked me out, Mom." I froze. Olivia had done many cruel things, but kicking her husband out into the cold rain, that was cruelty beyond imagination. "Why?" I asked. Noah let out a bitter laugh. Olivia said, "I'm not qualified to be her husband." It felt like someone grabbed my heart and squeezed hard. Noah sank into the chair, burying his head in his hands. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto the carpet, blending with his tears. "Mom." I tried. I tried everything Olivia and her father wanted. I changed myself, I endured, I stayed quiet, but I'm just not enough for them. He looked up. That look, the look of someone worn down to the core, forced me to turn away so I wouldn't cry. I sat beside him and placed my hand on his back, feeling each shaky breath. "Noah, you're not wrong. You're not useless. You're not inadequate. You're just surrounded by people who don't recognize your worth." But Noah only shook his head. "I'm tired, Mom. I don't even recognize myself anymore." When he said that, I knew. This marriage had shattered long ago. Noah just hadn't found the courage to let go. I made him a cup of hot tea and set it in front of him. He held the cup with both hands, as if trying to absorb enough warmth to keep from falling apart completely. I sat beside him, without saying anything else. You can't fix someone with a few encouraging words. Sometimes silent presence matters more. When Noah finally calmed down a little, I said, "Noah, it's time for you to leave this toxic marriage." He said nothing. No agreement, no refusal. I knew that hesitation well, born from loyalty, from fear of starting over, from the guilt of thinking he had failed. I held his hand. "Noah, you can't go back to a place that hurts you like this. You've tried harder than anyone. But love isn't endless endurance." He looked at me, eyes still red. "I'm scared, Mom." I nodded. Everyone is scared when they leave a place they once called home. But Noah, if you stay, they will destroy you. Then I let the final sentence fall, soft but absolute. "They want to break you, Noah, but I will not let them." Noah lowered his head. New tears fell into his hands. But unlike the tears from the nights before, these were the tears of someone finally letting go of a weight that had crushed him for far too long. That night, Noah slept on the old sofa where he used to lie and watch cartoons as a little boy. I tucked a blanket around him, just like when he was small, then walked into the kitchen where my blue notebook lay open on the table. I wrote a line bolder than any line before. "It's time to act." The next morning, I called Henry and said, "It's time for the next step." Henry didn't ask if I was sure. He just said, "Pierce Manufacturing is at its weakest point in history. If you're going to make a move, now is the moment." I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Every financial lesson, every consultation, every page of notes, all leading to one decision. I submitted a formal offer to acquire Pierce Manufacturing through Turner Strategic Holdings. It was an offer to purchase a controlling stake at a low price, but one that reflected the company's collapsing condition. An offer Randall couldn't ignore, but also couldn't accept easily. I sent the documents through legal channels, ensuring my identity stayed hidden. Randall would only see the name of an emerging investment firm, not Maggie Turner, age 66, from Raleigh, North Carolina. My hand trembled when I hit send, but it wasn't fear. It was the feeling of finally standing up after being pushed into a corner for far too long. 3 days later, I received a call from Henry. "Maggie, you need to hear this," Henry said quickly. "Randall, he's panicking." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. What did he say? "He has no idea who Turner Strategic Holdings is. He thinks it's a competitor who found out his weakness. He's calling every investor he knows, but no one wants to touch a sinking company." I stayed silent as Henry continued. "Randall is desperate. You chose the perfect moment." I looked out the window. Winter snow had started to fall, the flakes light but cold, just like the feeling inside me. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't want revenge for myself. I was simply doing what a mother must do, protect her child from hands that wanted to destroy his life. This war was only beginning. After Henry told me Randall was spiraling because of the buyout offer, I knew the final opening had come. A man like Randall, who lived his whole life perched on the top of power, loses all composure when thrown into desperation. I only needed to wait for the moment he lost his footing and strike. And that moment came sooner than I expected. 3 days after the offer was sent, Randall called an emergency meeting at Pierce Manufacturing's headquarters. The news reached me through Henry just hours after Randall made his plea. "He's trying to bring in investors at any cost," Henry said over the phone. "But Maggie, I'm certain no one wants to touch a company collapsing this fast." I wasn't surprised. The companies that smelled danger had quietly pulled away long ago. The unfinished projects, the mounting debts, the lawsuits hanging over them. All of it made Pierce Manufacturing look like a sinking ship everyone wanted to abandon. Only Randall kept clinging to the wreckage as if it were his own pride. After the meeting, Randall called more than 10 longtime partners. Henry's sources reported 9 rejected him immediately, 2 stalled, and 1 said, "Randall, I'm sorry, I can't save a sinking ship." I could imagine him slamming his fist, yelling, pacing through his office with fury. But I didn't care about his emotions, only the timing. This was exactly when he was at his weakest. While Randall scrambled for a lifeline, Henry and I finalized the offer through Turner Strategic Holdings. We offered to buy 60% of the shares, enough to take full control, at a price far below what they claimed the company was worth. But it was a price that perfectly reflected the truth, an offer sharp enough to hit Randall's fear, yet realistic enough to leave him with no other option. Henry sent the negotiation packet. Randall replied in less than 2 hours. A single message: "We need to meet." That was the moment I knew Randall had lost. When a man of power reaches out to a nameless investor, it means he has run out of moves. But I still kept the strategy. Total silence. I let Henry handle it while I stayed in the shadows. Randall met Henry at a fancy restaurant in Charlotte. I wasn't there, but Henry recounted every detail as if I had been sitting at the next table. Randall, the same man who once made Noah kneel on the floor, showed up looking worn out, disheveled hair, crooked tie, dark circles under his eyes. He opened his laptop, scrolling through slides, trying to convince Henry that the company was just going through temporary difficulties. Henry kept a calm expression, then said only, "We know the real situation. This is our final offer." Randall turned pale, but he signed. Not because he trusted Turner Strategic Holdings, not because he believed he would be rescued. He signed because he had no other choice. A man who built his life on absolute dominance had, for the first time, sold his authority to people he didn't even know. I could imagine the tremor in his hand as he held that pen. What relieved me most was that Noah still had no idea. I didn't want my son to feel like a burden. I didn't want him thinking I fought this battle because he was weak. I wanted Noah to stand tall on the day he learned the truth, seeing me not as a rescuer, but as a mother protecting her child from cruelty he never deserved. Noah asked me a few times why I was so busy, why I left the house at unusual hours. I only said I was helping a friend from church organize storage files. He believed me. He believed me because Noah always believes me, and that made me even more determined not to slip. While Randall signed in despair, Olivia, sharp, calculating, born into the world of wealth, began to suspect something. She did not sit still. She dug through documents, checked investment firm directories, even called friends in finance to ask about Turner Strategic Holdings. But of course, she found nothing. Turner Strategic Holdings was created precisely to reveal nothing. Henry once joked, "Maggie, you hide your tracks better than the young investors." I knew Olivia was only worried about her family, her father, her family's reputation. Not for a single second did she worry about Noah, the man she had vowed to love for life. Thinking of that brought a mixture of sadness and resolve to my heart. Noah deserved someone who lived for their marriage, not someone who hid the truth to protect her elite lineage. In the midst of all the chaos, I maintained silence. No reaction, no acceleration, no hesitation. A silence that kept the enemy guessing. A silence that made Randall believe he still had room to negotiate. In reality, everything was already set. The transfer contracts were signed. Randall's lawyer confirmed the transaction. Henry prepared every legal document to ensure the acquisition proceeded smoothly, cleanly, and without giving Randall any chance to fight back. One rainy afternoon, Henry sent me the thick stack of final paperwork. He said, "It only comes down to one final step now, announcing the new owner." I held the stack of documents, feeling the cold at my fingertips, not from fear, but because I knew that moment would be the moment Randall Pierce lost everything, and I would be the one to witness it. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the desk lamp casting a warm glow over the papers spread out before me. I thought of every tear Noah had shed, every insult he had endured, every night he slept on my sofa after being thrown out of his home. I wasn't looking for victory. I wasn't hungry for some dramatic revenge. I just wanted Randall to understand one thing. He had chosen the wrong person to hurt. And I wanted Noah to stand up again, no longer living in fear. I closed the file. I knew tomorrow would be a day Randall would never forget for the rest of his life. The announcement of the new owner was scheduled for 9 a.m., and at exactly 8:58, I, Margaret Maggie Turner, the 66-year-old mother Randall once dismissed, walked into the conference room. At 8:58 that morning, I entered Pierce Manufacturing's headquarters with the calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Not pride, not personal revenge, but the quiet resolve of a mother doing what was necessary to protect her child. The large conference room on the 14th floor was already packed. Directors, department heads, in-house attorneys, and the entire leadership team sat in formal rows. Every head turned when the door opened. A few unfamiliar faces looked at me with polite curiosity. They had no idea who I was. I liked that. I wanted to walk into their world like an unexpected gust of wind. And then I saw Randall Pierce. He stood at the head of the table, his usual dark blue suit looking wrinkled, his face exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. But what struck me most were his eyes, the same eyes that once looked at Noah with contempt, now filled with fear. As I stepped farther into the room, Randall's eyes widened in disbelief, his face drained of color in a single breath. He stammered, voice cracking, What are you doing here?" A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. A few people shot uneasy glances at each other, whispering under their breath. I could feel the tension spreading like tiny waves across still water. I didn't sit down immediately. I stood at the head of the table, placed my handbag on a chair, and took out the thick file Henry had prepared. I set it onto the table with a sharp, echoing thud, louder than any spoken declaration. I looked straight at Randall and said slowly, "I am the new owner of Pierce Industries, Mr. Randall." There are moments in life when the air seems to split in two. This was one of them. The entire room went silent. The chief financial officer dropped his pen. Another director's mouth fell open, no sound coming out. The company's in-house attorney froze, turning toward Randall as if asking, "Is she telling the truth?" And Randall? He no longer carried even a shadow of his former authority. He stepped back half a pace, arms slack at his sides, his whole body collapsing inward. Finally, he sank into his chair, completely undone. I could hear his breathing, short, panicked. And in that moment, I saw the man who once forced my son to kneel on a dirty floor, now pushed to the edge of his own ruin. Part of me felt the sting of witnessing a man break so completely. But the other part, the part that had watched Noah be crushed day after day, understood this was the price Randall had earned. I continued, my voice calm but firm. "You signed the transfer agreement, didn't you? Therefore, today I'm announcing to the entire board, Turner Strategic Holdings, led by me, is the new owner of the company." Again, the room fell into absolute stillness. No one dared breathe too loudly. Randall placed a trembling hand on the table. No, you can't. You don't have this kind of money. You don't have the resources. This can't be real. He choked on his own words. It can't be you. I looked at him, not with triumph, but with a clarity he could no longer deny. You think a mother can't do this? I tilted my head, speaking even more deliberately. You misjudged the wrong person from the very beginning, Randall, and you misjudged my son. A hesitant voice spoke up, the head of human resources. Excuse me. Does this mean all current company operations fall under your decision-making now? I nodded. Exactly. A hum of whispers spread across the room. I saw fear, confusion, but also a glimmer of hope in the eyes of those who had suffered under Randall's chaotic leadership. They didn't know who I was, but they understood one thing. Anyone who wasn't Randall was an improvement. Just when the atmosphere was stretched to the breaking point, the conference room doors burst open. Olivia stormed in, her heels striking the marble floor with sharp, angry clicks. "Dad, I heard something." She scanned the room, and then her eyes landed on me. For a moment, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Without anyone speaking, she understood. "No, it can't be you." She stepped forward. "You can't be. This company belongs to my family." I turned toward her. "Not anymore, Olivia." Her face flushed bright red, her voice rising. "Dad, do something. Take the company back. This is Pierce Manufacturing. You can't let some outsider, someone like her." She didn't finish her sentence because Randall shouted, "Olivia, stop!" It was the first time I'd ever heard him yell at her like that. Olivia froze, trembling with rage. Randall muttered, almost to himself, I signed it. I can't undo it. Everything is legally binding." Olivia whipped back toward me, venom in her eyes. "What did you do? What trick did you use? Did you trap my father?" I placed both hands on the table, my voice soft but sharp enough to cut through steel. "No tricks, no traps, no coercion. Your father signed willingly because he drove this company to the ground and no one else wanted to save it." Olivia clenched her jaw and turned back to her father. "Dad, tell me you didn't actually sign." Randall said nothing. He simply slumped deeper into his chair, one hand covering his face, the picture of defeat. When no one could challenge me any longer, I straightened up and opened the official document from Henry. "I have a formal announcement." All eyes turned to me. Effective immediately, the entire leadership structure will be reorganized. Some positions will remain, some will change based on merit. I promise no one will lose their job unless tied to financial misconduct. A wave of relief washed through part of the room. Others glanced nervously at Randall. I scanned the room and delivered the final blow. "The era of Randall Pierce is over." Randall jerked upright as if stabbed. Olivia's face went ghost white with fury. But it was the truth, and sometimes the truth arrives wearing the face of a simple mother they once underestimated. When everything was said and done, I gathered my documents while the leadership team sat frozen in disbelief. Randall couldn't stand. Olivia stormed out like a storm unleashed. I walked toward the door, then turned and said, "This meeting is adjourned. At 3 this afternoon, I want all department heads present for the restructuring briefing." Everyone nodded instantly, the first time they followed instructions without Randall's voice behind them. I stepped into the hallway, and right then, I pulled out my phone and called the only person who needed to be here on this monumental day. When Noah answered, I spoke slowly. "Noah, can you come to Pierce?" I need you. But I want to tell you the reason face to face. I left the conference room with steady, deliberate steps. Not to flaunt victory, but to let the air settle before the next storm began. I knew Noah's arrival would be the pivotal moment, not just for him, but for the entire Pierce empire. I stood in the hallway watching employees walk by with confused, curious glances. They must have wondered who this older woman in a simple brown knit coat was, and how, in a matter of minutes, everything they knew about their company had changed. I waited about 10 minutes before the elevator opened. Noah stepped out. Still the same gentle face, still the same tired eyes, not yet healed from months of emotional strain. But now there was something else, uncertainty mixed with hope. He looked around, searching for me among the stairs. When he spotted me, he hurried over, worry written all over his face. "Mom, what's going on? You called me here. Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine, Noah. I just need you here to hear something important." He squinted, confused. I placed my hand on his shoulder, soft but firm, and said, "Son, I am the new owner of this company." Noah froze, completely froze. I watched his lips part, but no sound came out. In a few seconds, his expression shifted from shock to disbelief to utter astonishment. No way." He stepped back. "Mom, what are you talking about? How could you—" His voice cracked. I smiled gently, shaking my head. "You don't need to ask how. You just need to know I did it for you, for everything you endured." Noah lifted a hand to cover his face. I heard his breath hitch, then a soft, uncontrollable sob escaped. "Mom, you didn't have to do all of this for me. I'm not worth you carrying such a burden. I cupped his face between my hands and made him look straight at me. "Noah, listen to me." My voice was low but steady. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did it so you would know you deserve respect. You deserve to stand tall, not kneel before anyone." Tears rolled down Noah's cheeks. He pulled me into a tight embrace, as if afraid that letting go would make everything disappear. "Thank you, Mom. But are you sure? This is huge." I brushed his hair gently. "Noah, nothing is too big when it comes to protecting my child." After giving Noah a few minutes to calm down, I led him into the conference room next door, a smaller, quieter room, just right for a private conversation. When the door closed, I sat down across from him and opened the folder Henry had prepared. "Noah," I said, "I have an offer for you." He wiped his eyes, trying to steady himself. "What kind of offer?" I slid the folder toward him. "You will become the new CEO of Pierce Industries." Noah looked at me as if I had just said something impossible. "Mom, I can't. I'm not capable enough. I don't even know how they run half the departments here. I raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "You are not Randall. You don't need to know everything on day one." I leaned back in my chair. "But you have something Randall never had: kindness, humility, and a sincere desire to do what's right for this company." Noah lowered his head, his voice trembling. "Mom, I lost my confidence. I don't believe in myself anymore." I smiled gently and touched his hand. "That's okay. I believe in you, and sometimes having just one person believe is enough." Noah kept his eyes closed for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "Mom, I'll try. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I will try." I nodded, feeling half of the weight in my chest lift. When Noah and I stepped into the hallway, many employees were already gathered. They had heard the news from the earlier meeting and were waiting to see what would happen next. And something unexpected occurred. When Noah walked beside me, the entire hallway fell silent. No mocking laughter like before. No snide whispers the way it used to be when Randall ordered him around. They looked at Noah differently, with curiosity, with uncertainty, and with a dawning realization that the person who once stood at the bottom might now be someone they needed to pay attention to. I heard a few murmurs. Is it really him? Noah? No way. I glanced at Noah and smiled. Come on, son, it's time for you to meet everyone. Back in the large conference room, Randall was still sitting there. His face was ashen, as if he had aged 10 years in a single morning. When Noah walked in behind me, Randall shot up from his chair. Noah, don't listen to her. You don't understand what's happening. She tricked. I cut him off. Randall, you do not have the right to speak to the new CEO in that tone. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. New CEO? Randall repeated, his eyes empty. I nodded. Yes, Noah Turner is the new CEO of Pierce Manufacturing. Randall staggered as if someone had punched him straight in the chest. No, impossible. He has no experience. He's just... I held his gaze. He is far more capable than you ever allowed him to be, and he certainly deserves better treatment than what you gave him. No one said a word. The room was utterly silent. I turned to the in-house attorney and the leadership team. Starting today, Randall Pierce will hold the position of strategic advisor, unpaid, with no signing authority and no involvement in company operations. The sentence fell like a verdict. Randall collapsed back into his chair. He had nothing left to say. And then Olivia arrived. She stood in the doorway, her face flushed red, her eyes swollen with rage. The moment she saw Noah standing beside me, she rushed forward, her anger exploding. Noah, are you out of your mind? You're letting your mother destroy my family? You're taking her side? Noah stepped back, but his voice was calmer than I expected. Olivia, don't talk about my mother like that. She let out a sharp, poisonous laugh. And who do you think you are? A failure whose mommy bought him a CEO title. You think anyone will respect you? Noah didn't move. For the first time in months, my son's eyes held no fear. Olivia, he said slowly, I want a divorce. The room gasped. Olivia's mouth fell open, no words coming out. Right here, right now, Noah continued. I want everything to end. I won't stay in a marriage where I'm nothing but a tool. Olivia dropped onto a chair, her eyes wide with shock and fury. I looked at Noah, standing tall, voice steady. And I knew my son was finally coming, back to himself. When the meeting ended, Randall was escorted out in silence. Olivia was helped away by a family member, and Noah and I remained in that sunlit room. Noah looked around, then at me. Mom, everything really has changed. I took his hand and squeezed it gently. Yes, Noah, a new era begins today. And deep inside, I knew this was the first day my son entered his life with a new posture. Not kneeling, but standing tall, as someone worthy of respect. In the days after Noah officially became the new CEO of Pierce Industries, everything moved like a whirlwind that reassured me I had made the right decisions. Still, I never imagined the fall of the Pierce family would happen so swiftly, as if their entire empire had been held up by nothing but arrogance instead of any real foundation. The first thing Olivia did after that chaotic meeting was sue Noah. She hired an attorney, filed claims demanding marital assets, compensation for emotional damage, and a share of company equity Noah never even possessed when they married. Olivia showed up to court in an elegant dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, trying to portray herself as the victim of a deceitful marriage. But she forgot one thing. Olivia was the one who forced Noah to sign a prenuptial agreement, a prenup drafted by the Pierce family's attorney, stating clearly that in the event of a divorce, Olivia could not claim any of Noah's assets, not even those acquired during the marriage. Henry told me what happened during the hearing. When the judge asked Olivia whether she recognized her signature at the bottom of the prenup, she froze for a moment before her face drained of color. Just one sentence. The court denies your request for asset division. And Olivia lost completely. She walked out of the courthouse with red-rimmed eyes, her face twisted with fury, while Noah stood beside Henry with a strange calm, perhaps because, for the first time, he felt the law protecting him. Meanwhile, Randall didn't fare any better. After I took over and released certain internal documents, investigators began noticing irregularities he had tried to hide. Not revenge, just cleaning up the financial system so the company wouldn't collapse. But that also meant Randall Pierce finally had to face the financial misconduct he had committed. Every week brought a new inquiry. The reputation he once built with lavish parties and boastful speeches was now nothing but an empty shell. A major business paper even published an article titled, "The Randall Pierce Empire Collapse from Within." I took no pleasure in it. It was simply the inevitable result of a man who valued his ego more than integrity. Olivia didn't escape consequences either. Charlotte's business community is small and word spreads fast. Everyone knew how she treated Noah, knew about her absurd lawsuit, and knew how she helped cover for her father. People who once showcased her as the golden daughter of wealth now avoided her like fire. A conference that had scheduled her as a keynote speaker removed her name overnight. A fashion brand froze all future collaborations. She had once stood in the spotlight, but that same spotlight exposed everything when the applause stopped. Olivia began avoiding public appearances, and then, one quiet morning, she left the city with a few expensive suitcases, leaving behind a reputation built on arrogance and money. While the Pierce family fell apart, the company, now renamed Turner Industries, stepped into a period of renewal. I didn't buy the company just for Noah. I wanted to build a workplace where Noah could be himself, kind, fair, and respectful. The first thing we did was restructure the compensation system, everything transparent. No more special allowance for Pierce relatives. We improved the work environment too. A cleaner cafeteria, upgraded restrooms, more comfortable office spaces. Small details, but they changed the atmosphere instantly. And I created an employee support fund, something Randall would never have considered. The most touching part came weeks later, when employees who had been bullied under Randall began visiting my office. Some said, "Thank you, I was about to quit last year." Another even cried, "I never thought this company could feel compassionate." Those words reminded me that my battle wasn't just for Noah. It was for the quiet people who had suffered under a tyrant. But what warmed me the most came from Noah. One late afternoon, I walked past his office and saw him smiling, a real smile. The first real smile I'd seen in years. His eyes were brighter, his voice steadier, his posture straight. My son was standing tall again. That night when he left the office, I asked, "Did you have a good day, Noah?" He smiled softly, a simple smile that warmed my heart. "Yes, Mom. I haven't felt this like myself in years." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You deserve it." A week later, Randall sent me a letter. I didn't open it right away. I set the white envelope on my desk, feeling no anger, no triumph, just peace. When I finally opened the letter, I saw just a few lines. "Maggie, I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong. Wrong to Noah, wrong to the company, wrong to myself." I read all of it. A long letter filled with regret. Then folded it back up. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because some apologies exist only to ease the weight on the one who speaks, not to heal the one who hears. And I was no longer responsible for easing Randall's conscience. A few months later, Olivia left Charlotte quietly. No goodbyes, no farewell dinner. She left behind only a handful of old friends, the same people who had quickly turned their backs on her the moment she stumbled. I heard the news through a contact in the industry. Olivia had moved to another state, away from all attention. A sad ending for a woman who once believed the whole world would forever bow at her feet. And Noah. At a local community meeting about a volunteer art project, he met a woman a few years younger. Her name was Emily Hart, a gentle and empathetic art teacher. I saw the way Noah spoke to her. No tension, no fear, no need to earn approval. Just a soft, genuine smile. As they stood together, I saw something I had been waiting for a very long time. Hope. Not for the company, not for reputation, but for my son's life. The months that followed moved at an entirely different rhythm. If once Noah went to work with dread on his shoulders, now each morning seemed like a fresh start. Clearer, lighter, and full of meaning. I watched that change with all the pride a mother could feel. Noah walked into the office with a confidence I hadn't seen since he was little. Not loud or arrogant, but calm, steady, the kind of confidence that comes from finally knowing your worth. Employees greeted him with respect, not the kind of flattery people show to power, but genuine respect for someone who truly listened, understood, and stood up for them. I heard many say that since Noah took over as CEO, the company felt entirely different. Meetings weren't chaotic anymore. Ideas that were once dismissed under Randall were now considered. A longtime employee told me during the quarterly review, "Mr. Noah makes us feel like we matter. It's been a long time since I came to work without that heavy feeling." I smiled when I heard that, because I knew kindness heals far more deeply than dominance ever could. The restructuring, guided by me and Henry combined with Noah's natural leadership, slowly pulled the company back from the edge. Old debts were paid, new contracts were signed, and most importantly, employee morale skyrocketed. I remember the morning Noah walked into my living room holding the financial report. His eyes sparkled like a child who just got a perfect grade. "Mom, we made a profit this quarter." I laughed, cupped his face in my hands. "Noah, you did it." He shook his head gently. "Not me, us." I didn't argue. Even if he said that, I knew it was Noah who stood at the front, who changed how Pierce, now Turner Industries, operated, who cleaned up the mess Randall left behind. My son, the same boy who once knelt to wipe coffee off the floor for his father-in-law, was now standing before an entire board of directors with steady shoulders. And me. For the first time in years, I could finally live a little for myself. I replanted the garden behind my house, the one I had neglected during all those months of supporting Noah. I bought a few pots of lavender for the porch, and every morning I sat outside with a book, soaking in the soft early sun. In the afternoons, I rocked gently on the swing beneath the maple tree. I realized I had walked through a lifetime of storms. But I had never been broken, and now I could finally breathe slowly, gently, peacefully. People started calling me Powerhouse Maggie or the woman who brought Randall down, but I always laughed and shook my head. I was just a mother who did what she had to do to protect her child. Then one day, Noah invited me to dinner at a small restaurant downtown. He said someone wanted to meet me. I went curious, though trying to keep my usual calm. When I walked in, I saw Emily, the woman Noah had mentioned a few times, with her gentle eyes and a warm, honey-colored smile. "Mom, this is Emily," Noah introduced, his voice a little shaky. Emily stood, reached out, and took my hand, softly, sincerely. "It's such a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Turner. Noah talks about you often." I looked into her eyes. Something in them reassured me instantly. The purity of a heart without calculation, so different from Olivia. Emily wasn't trying to impress me. She was just being herself. And that simplicity made me feel at ease. The dinner was simple. Salad, warm soup, grilled salmon. But it was one of the gentlest meals I had shared in years. I watched how Emily spoke to Noah, kind, respectful, never demanding. Noah listened, smiling, sometimes leaning toward her as if warmed from within. When Emily stepped outside to take a call, Noah leaned toward me. "What do you think of her, Mom?" I placed my hand over his, squeezed gently. "Noah, I've never seen anyone look at you the way she does. Without judgment, without expectations, just love." Noah bowed his head, a quiet smile forming. "I think so, too." As for Randall, he tried many times to reach Noah. Emails, letters, requests to meet as father and son. But Noah wasn't interested. Not out of hatred. He was simply exhausted. And because some doors, once closed, never reopen, not out of cruelty, but because the person who walked through them no longer belongs to the darkness behind them. One day Noah told me, "Mom, I don't want to go back to the old life. I don't want to hear excuses anymore. I just want peace and to be who I really am." I nodded. That decision didn't punish anyone. It saved him. During the company's anniversary celebration, the first one under the new name Turner Industries, the organizers unexpectedly invited me on stage to speak. I was startled. I had always preferred staying behind the scenes. But when the lights shone on me and I looked down at the crowd, employees who had survived chaos and witnessed rebirth, something inside me softened. The host introduced me with a sentence that stilled my heart. "Please welcome the woman who changed the fate of an entire corporation." I stepped onto the small wooden podium. I didn't say much, only what I truly believed. I didn't change anyone's fate. I just stood up at a moment when I knew that if I didn't, the person I loved most would be crushed, and I believe any mother here would have done exactly what I did. Below, many people nodded. Some even wiped their eyes. I didn't need recognition. Seeing them smile, that was the greatest honor. The biggest change arrived on an early autumn afternoon. Soft sunlight, gentle breeze touching the maple leaves behind the building. Noah brought Emily to meet me in the small garden near the administrative wing. "Mom, I have something to tell you," he said, nervous in the way someone gets when they're about to step into a new life. I looked at him, already sensing something in his eyes. Then Noah took out a small box and opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant silver ring. He inhaled deeply and said with steady clarity, "Mom, I want to propose to Emily, and I wanted you to be the first person to know." Emotion filled my chest. Warmth, gratitude, relief all at once. I hugged him and whispered, "Noah, you've found your light." Emily stood beside him, eyes glistening, and I simply smiled. In that moment, I understood that everything I had done, every pain, every battle, every confrontation, had finally brought my son exactly where he belonged, a healthy life, a kind love, a future he truly deserves. The day Noah and Emily, or rather Elise Emily Hart, as I learned from the wedding invitation, held their ceremony, the sky felt as if it was blessing them. The wedding was held at a small ranch outside Charlotte, with a wide green lawn and strings of warm yellow lights hanging like stars at dusk. Noah had said he didn't want a grand wedding. He wanted something intimate, where people could hear each other's laughter without being drowned out by loud music. It was soft, simple, yet warmer than any lavish party Olivia ever boasted about. As guests arrived, I stood in the front row by the flower-lined aisle. I wore a navy dress holding a small bouquet Elise had prepared for me. "I want Mom Maggie to look beautiful today," she had said. I chuckled. But in my heart, something tightened. Maybe because I had spent so many years fearing Noah would never find someone who truly loved him. But today, in that golden glow, I knew he had. The music began. Everyone fell silent. Noah walked out first, not in the expensive suit Olivia once forced on him, but in a simple light gray suit. His face glowed. His eyes held a whole horizon. Then Elise appeared, a soft white dress, simple, flowing, her hair half tied with tiny flowers, her eyes fixed on Noah, and only Noah. I heard the guests whisper, "They're beautiful together. That look, that's real love." But I barely heard them. My chest had already tightened with joy. When Elise reached him and they joined hands, the officiant smiled and began the vows. But when Noah spoke, his voice trembled. "Elise, you came into my life when I thought I had lost everything. You showed me what peace feels like. You look at me with an expression I never knew, no demands, no judgment, only love." Elise's eyes shimmered with tears, and I cried too. When it was Elise's turn, her voice was soft as a breeze. "Noah, you are the kindest man I've ever met. I didn't love you because of your title or your circumstances, but because of your heart, a heart that has never stopped wanting to do what's right." Those words soothed every wound Noah had ever carried. After the ceremony, the reception took place on the lawn. The sun slipped down and the warm lights above us glowed like a net of tiny stars. People laughed, clinked glasses, and swayed to gentle music. Then came Noah's speech. He stepped onto the small platform, holding a glass, eyes fixed on me. I froze for a moment, but he smiled, calming my heart instantly. "Mom," Noah began, voice deep and full of feeling, "if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be standing here today. There was a time I believed I had no worth, no future. But you saw what I had lost in myself. You stood up and fought for me when I couldn't stand up for myself." He placed his hand over his chest, as if steadying his own heart. "When you saved me, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a new one." I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down my face. The people sitting near me handed me tissues, and all I could do was smile through the tears. My son, the boy who once cried in my arms after being humiliated, was now standing before everyone, speaking with strength and gratitude. Nothing could make a mother happier. But then, I saw a familiar figure beyond the fence. A man stood at a distance, hand resting on the wooden rail, eyes fixed on the ceremony. No one else noticed him, only me, Randall Pierce. He didn't step inside. He didn't interrupt the wedding. He didn't hide in the shadows. He stood there quietly, his face looking much older than the last time I'd seen him. His eyes carried a sadness he couldn't mask. The sadness of a man who had lost everything. His reputation, his power, and worst of all, the son-in-law who once called him father. For a moment, our eyes met across the yard. Just a moment. I didn't nod. I didn't turn away. I didn't sneer. I simply looked at him calmly, without hatred, without resentment, just letting go. And I knew that was the right ending for both me and Randall. The ceremony continued, full of laughter. Elise took my hand and said, "I know Noah is as strong as he is because of you. Thank you for protecting him, for bringing him back." I smiled. "No, it was him. I only nudged him at the right time." Elise shook her head and held my hand tighter. "No one can lift someone who's fallen to the bottom unless they're a mother." I almost cried again, but instead I squeezed her hand gently, letting it be my thank you. When the reception ended, Noah and Elise walked over to me under the warm string lights. "We want you to move in with us," Elise said. "We want to take care of you as you get older." I laughed, half teasing, half touched. I'm not old yet, but I'll think about it. The truth was, I had been thinking about it for weeks, because I knew my age was heading toward the years when care would matter, and because I knew those two didn't see me as a burden, but as family they wanted to protect. A few weeks later, I began writing this entire story, not to boast about being clever or strong, but to speak to other mothers silently enduring injustice. I wrote with the heart of someone who had known loss, disrespect, and being cornered, yet stood back up because of love for her son. On every page, I repeated one thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it to restore fairness. Any mother on this earth, whether in North Carolina or anywhere else, would understand that. A mother's love isn't noise. It isn't threats or anger. It is steady, patient, quiet at times, but strong enough to change a destiny. And when I placed the final period on my story, the image in my mind wasn't of battles won, or Randall collapsing, or Olivia leaving. It was the moment Noah took Elise's hand and slid the ring onto her finger beneath the golden light. I knew my son's future was safe. I knew my family had healed. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. A long journey had ended, and a new life was opening, not just for Noah, but for me, a feeling complete, light, and peaceful. When everything began to settle, when Noah and Elise had stepped into their new life together, I found myself forming a habit, reflecting on all of it in the quiet late afternoons, when the last sunlight spilled through the window and lit up the pages of my notebook on the table. Sometimes I stopped for a long time, rereading the shaky lines I'd written during the darkest moments. Sometimes I wondered, how did I make it here? I remembered the exact moment it all began. The day I stood at the door of the conference room and saw Noah kneeling on the floor, wiping coffee with his bare hands, his face burning with humiliation. In that moment, my chest felt crushed. No mother is born to watch her child be degraded like that. But if someone asked me which moment changed me, it wasn't when I saw him being mistreated. It was the moment I turned and walked away, the moment I understood that if I reacted then, Randall would destroy my son in ways far worse. The moment I knew I had to choose my battlefield, and from that moment, a long journey unfolded. I looked back on everything, those sleepless nights filled with anger and heartbreak for Noah, the times I silently observed, waited, collected small clues that later became the foundation of the biggest strike of my life. I remembered every call with Henry, every trembling signature on the papers creating the shell company. Every morning I sat in my living room teaching myself finance so I wouldn't become prey in a world full of traps. I remembered the feeling of walking into that conference room, Randall frozen in place at the sight of me, my hands slightly shaking as I set the file on the table while trying to appear calm. And I remembered even more clearly Noah's face when he heard me say, I am the new owner of Pierce. From a man humiliated and belittled, Noah rose to become CEO, not because of privilege, but because of the kind heart he had always carried. And watching him return to himself, standing tall again, was the greatest reward of my life. I realized every pain, every setback was just a stepping stone toward a strength I didn't know I possessed. I was not extraordinary. I was not the strongest. I was simply a mother who could not sit still while her son was being destroyed by arrogance and greed. There was nothing extraordinary about what I did. There was only love, sometimes quiet, sometimes fierce, but always steadfast. And that is my legacy. Not the company I bought, not defeat in Randall, not becoming a symbol, as many at Turner Industries called me, but giving Noah back the future he deserved, helping him see his own worth, helping him leave a toxic marriage and find a kinder love. If life has any meaning for me, it is that. I hope my story, a story of an ordinary mother refusing to bow to injustice, reminds whoever is listening, your dignity, your self-respect, your future must never be bargained away. If someone is stepping on you to lift themselves higher, remember you are stronger than you think. You deserve more than what life sometimes shows you. And if you've ever been belittled, pushed into a corner, please believe there are new doors waiting for you to open. I say this not as someone who won, but as someone who once trembled, once felt fear, once sat alone at night thinking she wasn't strong enough to go on, but I did. And if I could, you can too. Now, as I write these last lines, Noah and Elise are in the kitchen preparing dinner. I hear their laughter, the clink of glasses, the soft shuffle of their steps. The house is full of warmth. I know I no longer need to worry. The future is steady. My son is happy, and my heart is at peace. Thank you, you who are listening, for walking with me through this long journey of tears, hurt, hope, and rebirth. If you're still here, it means my story touched a part of your heart, and that means more to me than you know. Where in the world are you listening from? I truly want to know. Every comment, even a single line, makes me feel like I didn't tell this story alone. Please leave a comment, share your thoughts. I promise I'll read every word. And if stories of justice, love, resilience, and the strength of age bring you comfort, hit subscribe and like the video so we can meet again on another journey, where I continue telling stories of people who seem fragile but carry storms within them. Thank you for being here, for staying, for listening to a mother's heart. To me, your presence is a greater gift than any victory. I still remember that sound clearly. The door slammed shut behind me, not because of the wind, but because my own daughter pushed it hard. The snow was falling so heavily I couldn't see the end of the street. I stood there, my hands trembling from the cold, while she spoke in a voice as calm as if she were reading a utility bill. I can't support another person who no longer earns money. I raised her alone for more than 30 years. And in just one white, snow-filled afternoon, I was erased from her life like an expense that was no longer necessary. But in that very moment, I didn't cry. I did something my daughter and the entire world never expected. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 63 years old, born and raised in the state of Ohio. My entire life has been tied to bitter winter mornings, salt-covered roads, and a rhythm so steady many people would call it boring. I was never a woman with grand dreams. All I wanted was a peaceful life, a warm home, an honest job, and a child raised properly. For 32 years, I worked at the same insurance company in Columbus. I started there when my hair was still black, when Lauren was just learning to walk. I stayed until gray crept in and my back began to ache whenever the weather turned cold. I was always there 15 minutes early, making coffee before work, organizing paperwork for the whole team. I remembered every co-worker's name, their birthdays, even the names of children I'd never met but had heard about for years. I believed in something very American, very old-fashioned. If you work hard and stay loyal, you will be treated fairly. I believed dedication mattered. I believed age was experience, not a burden. Until that Friday afternoon, my supervisor called me into the office with a politeness so cold it sent a chill through me. "Evelyn, we need to talk." I already knew what was coming. Over the past 2 months, older women in the department had been disappearing one by one. Desks emptied out. Potted plants were removed without explanation. They used the word restructuring. They said it had nothing to do with performance. They placed a thin envelope in front of me. 2 weeks of severance. 2 weeks of pay for more than 30 years of service. I signed the papers with a hand that was strangely calm, thanked them for the opportunity, and walked out of the building like a polite visitor who had simply wandered into the wrong place. On the bus ride home, I watched familiar shops slide past the fogged-up windows. I thought about Lauren. I thought about how I would tell her, not because I was afraid she'd be angry, but because I knew she was more worried about money than ever. I had lived with Lauren's family for nearly 5 years. After my husband passed away, and after I sold my small apartment to help her with the down payment on the house. Back then, Lauren cried, hugged me, and said, "Mom, you're my lifesaver." I believed her. I believed family was a safe place. Lauren's house was in a quiet neighborhood, rows of similar homes with neatly trimmed lawns. I walked in and took off my shoes like always. Jason was on the couch, a can of beer in his hand, eyes fixed on a basketball game I didn't care about. He nodded at me but said nothing. My 2 grandchildren ran out of the living room. "Grandma!" They wrapped their arms around my legs, the familiar scent of children's soap softening my heart. It was the only moment that day when I still felt like I belonged. Lauren was in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice tight. I caught fragments. Payment? Past due? Just 1 more week. When she hung up, her shoulders sagged. I stood there, my purse still in my hand, and said the sentence I had practiced the entire bus ride. "Lauren, I lost my job today." She turned to look at me. First came surprise, then very quickly her expression changed. Not worry, not sympathy, calculation, as if an invisible spreadsheet had appeared in front of her eyes. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice rising. I repeated it slowly, explained. "They're restructuring. I have 2 weeks of severance. I'll look for another job." Lauren didn't answer right away. She sat down, fingers interlaced. "Do you know Jason is unemployed?" she said. "Do you know we haven't paid this month's mortgage yet?" I nodded. I had helped them so many times before, small amounts that grew larger and larger. I never asked for anything back. I thought that was what a mother did. "Then you understand," Lauren continued, her voice turning cold. "I can't take on any more." I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Take on?" I repeated. "Mom," she sighed, "you don't have income. I can't support another adult who doesn't earn money." The words fell between us like a heavy object. Jason never looked up. The TV kept blaring the cheers of the crowd. I stood there, looking at my daughter, the child I once held through sleepless nights, and I didn't recognize her anymore. Lauren avoided my eyes. "You should find somewhere else to stay for now," she said, "just temporarily. Once you get back on your feet, then—" Outside the window, snow began to fall. Big, heavy flakes covered the walkway in front of the house. The morning forecast had warned of a storm. I looked outside, then back at my daughter. "Now?" I asked. Lauren was silent for 1 second too long. Then she nodded very slightly. I went upstairs and packed a few necessities. I could hear the children laughing downstairs, unaware that their grandmother was being erased from their lives. When I pulled my suitcase to the door, Lauren was already standing there. She opened it. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't hug me. The door slammed shut, not because of the wind. I stood on the porch as snow began to settle on my shoulders. My breath turned to steam. And in that moment, I understood something painfully clear. I hadn't just lost my job. I had been pushed out of my own family. I didn't stand there long. The snow crept into my collar, the cold seeping through my old coat. I dragged my suitcase down the steps and walked slowly toward the curb, where yellow streetlights cast a glow over the white ground. Each step sounded soft, but inside my head, the noise was deafening. 30 years. The number kept repeating in my mind, steady as the ticking clock on the wall of my old office. 30 years, I was never late. 30 years, I never took a day off unless I was truly sick. 30 years, I believed that if I did things right, lived honestly, life wouldn't be too cruel. I remembered my first morning at that insurance company. I was in my early 30s. Lauren couldn't even read yet. I wore a light blue dress I bought on sale, lunch packed the night before. The office was small and outdated, but full of hope. I was the youngest woman there, always volunteering for the tasks no one wanted. I learned quickly. I took careful notes. I didn't complain. When the company changed systems, I stayed late to learn the new software. When coworkers went on maternity leave, I took on extra work without asking for more pay. I was proud of being reliable. There were days I left the office long after dark, rushing home to cook dinner for Lauren. I ate a few quick bites, then sat at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork for the next day. I never thought of it as sacrifice. I thought it was simply the duty of a mother, of an honest worker. I believed that so deeply I never questioned it, until the past few years when things began to change, quietly, slowly, like cold air slipping through a crack you don't notice at first. Familiar faces disappeared. Patricia, who sat across from me for more than 20 years, was let go early. Linda, who brought homemade cookies every Friday, vanished after a closed-door meeting. They were all older. They all had the same confused look as they packed their things. At first, I reassured myself, maybe they retired willingly. Maybe the company gave them a package. I didn't want to think further. Then it was my turn. No thank you, no apology. Just a thin envelope and 2 weeks of severance. 2 weeks for 30 years. I held that envelope and felt no anger, only emptiness, as if someone had erased a part of my life with a few printed words. Standing outside my daughter's house, snow falling around my feet, I finally understood what it felt like to be discarded by society. No one says, "You're useless." All the doors just close at once. When you're young, they call you potential. When you're middle-aged, they call you experience. When you grow old, all they see is cost. I no longer had economic value. That was the cold truth I faced that afternoon. I sat down on the bus bench near Lauren's house. The stop was empty, snow piling up on the metal roof. I set my suitcase at my feet, hands resting on my knees, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid. Not a passing fear, but a deep, slow fear that took root. I was afraid of old age without money, afraid of waking up one day with nowhere to belong, afraid of having to beg, afraid of becoming exactly what my daughter had just called me, a person who no longer earns money. I thought about my old apartment, the one I sold to help Lauren buy this house. When I signed those papers, I smiled, believing I was investing in my child's future. I never kept a backup plan for myself. Back then, I believed family was the best insurance. I was wrong. The snow fell harder. The wind cut through my coat, making me shiver. And in that moment, images of Lauren as a child surfaced with painful clarity. She once had a high fever on a snowy night, and I carried her on foot to the emergency room because the car wouldn't start. She once sobbed when her father left, and I held her, promising I would never abandon her. She once told me as a teenager, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." I had lived up to that promise. She hadn't. I didn't blame Lauren right then. I only asked myself over and over, like a needle that wouldn't stop pricking, where did I go wrong? Did I raise her too fragile when it came to money? Did I sacrifice so much that she stopped seeing the value of that sacrifice? Or did I teach everyone, by always putting myself last, that this was simply where I belonged? Those questions followed me through that long evening. When the last bus of the day arrived, I stepped on and took a seat by the window. Outside, lit-up houses passed in silence. Somewhere, families were sitting down to dinner, sharing small stories around the table. And there I was, 63 years old, jobless, homeless, and realizing that 30 years of loyalty were worth exactly 2 weeks of pay, and not even enough to keep me in my own daughter's house. I leaned my head against the cold glass and closed my eyes. There were no tears left, only a terrifying emptiness, and a question with no answer yet. The bus stopped in front of a low, aging building, tucked between 2 abandoned warehouses. The sign out front was faded by snow and time, only a few words still readable. Women's Transitional Shelter. I pulled my suitcase down, its wheels catching on the icy curb with a sharp clack that made my head ache. I stood in front of the heavy metal door for a few seconds, not because I hesitated, but because I needed a moment to accept the truth. 63 years old, I, Evelyn Carter, was about to step into a shelter for homeless women. The door opened with a long creak. Warm air mixed with the smell of disinfectant rushed into my face. Not the smell of a hospital, but the smell of places that try to cover exhaustion with cleanliness. A middle-aged woman behind the reception desk looked up, her eyes tired, but not unkind. She asked my name, my date of birth, and a few familiar questions, as if she had asked them hundreds of times before. When I answered, my voice was so calm it surprised even me, as if everything had crossed some invisible line where shame no longer had the power to make me tremble. Inside, the space was large but bare. Pale beige walls, fluorescent lights casting a cold glow, whispered conversations, slippers dragging on the floor, soft coughing, all blending into a steady, sorrowful hum. I looked around and realized something that tightened my chest. Many of the women here looked like me. Not the images people usually imagine when they hear homeless. No madness, no torn clothes, just tired faces, eyes that once knew family dinner tables, living rooms with curtains, evenings watching the 6 o'clock news. A gray-haired woman sat clutching an old cloth bag. Another carefully folded a sweater as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. I saw pieces of myself in them, women who once had addresses, roles, people who called them family. I was led up an old metal staircase that creaked with every step. The hallway on the second floor was long and narrow, small windows fogged over. The staff member pointed to a bunk bed in the corner. "Bottom bunk," she said. "That window leaks a bit. Close the curtain if it gets cold." The bunk bed was metal, white paint chipped in places. The mattress was thin, the white sheet washed so many times it was worn. Near the window, a small gap let cold air slip in, carrying the chill of the snowy night. I set my suitcase beside the bed, sat on the edge, and felt the metal frame vibrate lightly under my weight. I had slept in better beds than this, many times, but I had never felt this lost. Night fell slowly. The hallway lights dimmed, leaving only a faint glow in the room. I lay there, pulling the blanket up to my chin, listening to the wind whistle through the crack in the window. Each gust made the curtain flutter, casting shifting shadows on the wall like nameless figures. I couldn't sleep. My eyes closed and opened again. Lauren's image kept appearing in my mind, not her cold face as she closed the door, but her as a little girl, hair in pigtails, grinning as she showed off a newly lost baby tooth. I thought about my grandchildren. I wondered if they would wake up in the morning and ask where Grandma was, or if they would quickly get used to her absence. That thought hurt more than the cold. I turned toward the wall, trying to stop the thoughts. But the feeling of being replaced crept in, persistent, as if I had finished my role and now there was no place for me anymore. I had been a mother, a model employee, someone people needed, and now I was just a bunk bed that could be filled by anyone else once I left. For a moment, I wondered if sacrificing so much had been a mistake, if keeping my apartment, keeping a little selfishness, might have changed everything. But those questions brought no answers, only made my chest feel heavier. A woman in the opposite bunk shifted in her sleep and let out a very soft sigh. That sound made me realize I wasn't alone in this loss. Everyone here had a story, a fall, a door that had been shut. I lay there for a long time, listening to my heartbeat slow down, and in that cold silence, another thought began to form, slowly but clearly. I had lost so much today, but I was still alive. I was still breathing, and if life had already pushed me all the way to the bottom like this, then at the very least, I had nothing left to lose. I turned my face toward the ceiling, staring at the faint cracks under the weak light. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I only whispered to myself, like a promise meant for no one else to hear. If I survive tonight, if I still have the strength to stand up tomorrow, I will never let anyone step on me again. Outside, the snow kept falling. But for the first time since the door at Lauren's house slammed shut, I felt something very small, very fragile inside me. Not hope, but clarity. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the light snapping on suddenly at 6 a.m. There was no alarm clock, no familiar smell of coffee, just the shuffling sound of slippers on the floor and a staff member's steady voice announcing breakfast. My body felt heavy as lead. I had barely slept the night before. Still, I sat up and carefully folded my blanket out of old habit, the habit of someone who once believed that small order could keep life from completely falling apart. After a simple breakfast of watery oatmeal and a weak cup of coffee, we were asked to line up at the end of the hallway. A small sign hung on the wall read, "Health screening, mandatory for new residents, mandatory health screening." I wasn't surprised. Places like this have to make sure there are no contagious diseases. I stood in line with the other women, all of us silent, eyes drifting without focus. Someone coughed dryly. Someone else clutched an old coat tightly, like a fragile layer of protection. The medical room was at the end of the first floor, small and so clean it felt out of place in the aging building. A few posters hung on the walls advising people to quit smoking, monitor blood pressure, eat healthy. Good advice, but it sounded like a luxury to people who didn't know where they'd sleep that night. When it was my turn, I walked in and sat on the plastic chair beside the exam table. The nurse looked up and smiled, not overly cheerful, but genuine. That alone eased my tension a little. She introduced herself as Hannah Lewis, early 40s, brown hair neatly tied back, thin-framed glasses. Her eyes were calm, used to broken stories, but still gentle enough that I didn't feel like just another file. "We'll check your blood pressure, heart rate, and take a little blood for basic tests," she said, her voice even and soft. "Just routine." I nodded. I had no expectations at all. At my age, every test comes with a quiet fear: diabetes, heart disease, cancer. I had prepared myself to hear another piece of bad news. I think I believed I no longer had the strength to be surprised again. Hannah wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. The numbers made her frown slightly before she wrote something down. "A bit high," she said. "Stress lately?" I gave a faint smile. "You could say that." She didn't ask more. Some answers don't need digging into. Then she prepared the needle. I turned my head to the side and stared at the poster in front of me. A smiling family around a dinner table, an image so familiar it hurt. The needle pierced my skin. A small, familiar sting. A small vial slowly filled with my blood. The dark red liquid that had flowed through me for more than 60 years, raised a child, carried me through countless working days. I had never thought about my blood that way. To me, it had always just existed, quiet, anonymous, like me for so many years. Hannah labeled the vial and wrote my name, Evelyn Carter. Seeing my name printed on that white label gave me a strange feeling, as if, for the first time in a long while, my name was attached to something specific. "We'll have the results in 1 or 2 days," she said. "If there's anything we need to look at, I'll let you know." I thanked her, stood up, and left the medical room without thinking much more about it. At that moment, my only simple thought was, I hope nothing serious shows up. The next 2 days crawled by. I went to the public library to stay warm and read newspapers. I scanned job listings, even though deep down I knew my age was an invisible wall. I returned to the shelter at night, ate dinner in silence, then lay back down on the bunk bed near the drafty window. On the 3rd day, as I was lining up for lunch, a staff member came looking for me. "Evelyn Carter," she called. "Nurse Hannah would like to see you." My heart tightened. In that instant, I thought, this is it. I followed her down to the medical room, each step heavier than the last. Hannah was standing by the desk, flipping through a folder. When she saw me, she looked up, and right then, I noticed something unusual. Not worry, not pity, but hesitation. She pulled out a chair and motioned for me to sit. "Evelyn," she began, slower than usual, "I need to talk to you about your test results." I clasped my hands tightly on my lap. "Is something wrong?" I asked, bracing myself for the familiar words. Hannah took a breath. "Not in the way you're thinking," she said. "Actually, your results are quite unusual." I frowned. At my age, unusual is never a comforting word. "Your basic numbers are fine," Hannah continued. "But during the blood tests, we found that you have a very rare type of antibody." I looked at her, confused. An antibody? She nodded and explained briefly, just enough for me to follow. Some people, very rare, have unique immune traits, and I, based on the initial results, might be one of them. We need to run more advanced tests to confirm, Hannah said. But if it's true, your blood could help another patient. I let out a soft laugh, not because it was funny. Are you saying I have some strange disease? I asked. Or that I'm about to... No, Hannah interrupted firmly. You don't have a dangerous illness, at least not from what we can see. I exhaled, but I still didn't understand. Then what is it? Hannah looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing every word. There's a patient at one of our partner hospitals, she said. An older man in a coma. Standard treatments are no longer working. His family is searching for experimental options. I stayed silent. Each word seemed to move through the air very slowly. Your antibodies, Hannah continued, may be compatible with a therapy like that. If additional tests confirm it, your blood could save his life. The room seemed to shrink. I looked down at my hands that once wiped my child's nose, typed thousands of insurance files, trembled in the snowy wind just days ago. You're saying, save his life? I asked, my voice rough. Hannah nodded. It's possible. No one can promise anything, but the possibility is real. I didn't know how to react. My thoughts were spinning. I had prepared myself for bad news, not for this. The patient's family, Hannah went on, gentle but clear, is willing to pay a very large amount for this experimental therapy because it isn't covered by insurance. I looked up at her. A large amount? She nodded. She didn't say the number, but her eyes said everything. I sat there unable to speak. A strange feeling spread through me. Not joy, not exactly fear, but total shock. 3 days ago, I had been thrown out of a house because I no longer earned money. 3 days ago, I was a burden. And now, the only thing I had left, my own body, carried a value I had never imagined. I thought about Lauren, about the door slamming shut, about her cold words. Then I looked back at Hannah. What do you need me to do? I asked quietly. Hannah smiled, and in her eyes was something that looked like respect. First, you need to know the choice is entirely yours, she said. No one can force you. I just thought. You should know that you are not worthless. You never were. Those words hit me harder than any diagnosis. I left the medical room walking slowly. The hallway looked the same, the lights just as cold, the other women still sitting in silence. But inside me, something had shifted. For the first time since the door at Lauren's house closed, I no longer felt erased. The only thing I had left turned out to have value. That day, Hannah drove me herself to the hospital. The air was still cold, snow not yet fully melted along the curb, but the sky was brighter than it had been in days. The car passed through downtown Columbus, where tall glass buildings reflected the pale winter sunlight. I had lived here nearly my entire life, yet this time everything looked unfamiliar, as if I were stepping into a world I had never been allowed to touch before. The hospital rose in front of me, large and silent, a pale concrete structure with endless rows of windows. The parking lot was nearly full. Ambulances moved in and out, lights flashing in the cold haze. I stood at the entrance for a few seconds, pulling my collar higher, my palms sweating despite the low temperature. I had brought Lauren to this hospital when she was little, during bouts of pneumonia or high fever. Back then, I was the anxious mother, gripping her hand, ready to do anything to protect her. Now I walked in alone, in a completely different role. Not a family member, not medical staff. I was a homeless woman carrying something whose value I barely understood. We took the elevator up. When the doors opened, a familiar smell hit me, the sharper scent of disinfectant, metal, and the cold air of medical equipment. The sign was clear: ICU, Intensive Care Unit. I swallowed. Hannah led me down a long hallway where machines hummed steadily, like the mechanical breathing of the entire floor. Through glass windows, I saw brightly lit rooms, bodies lying motionless, tubes and wires everywhere. Each room held a story suspended between life and death. We stopped in front of a room at the end of the hall. Hannah knocked softly, then opened the door. A woman stood up when we entered. She looked to be in her early 70s, slender silver hair neatly combed. She wore a light gray sweater and dark slacks, simple, understated. But what caught my attention most were her eyes, red from lack of sleep, yet holding an unusual calm. "Are you Evelyn?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. I nodded. Yes. She stepped forward and took my hands in both of hers. Her hands were warm, slightly trembling. "I'm Margaret Bennett," she said, "Richard's wife." I didn't know what to say. I only felt the way she held my hands, not like grasping a lifeline, but like holding another human being. No pleading, no pressure, just quiet gratitude, without any promises demanded. Through the glass behind her, I saw the man lying in the hospital bed. He was thinner than I expected, silver-haired, his face so still it almost didn't seem real. The machines around him beeped steadily, reminding us that his life was being held in place by technology. "Richard Bennett," Hannah said quietly beside me, 74 years old. I had heard that name somewhere before, on the news, in evening business reports when I still lived with Lauren. A successful businessman who built a large logistics company from nothing. But seeing him there, I didn't see wealth or power. I saw a man sleeping very deeply and a wife waiting for him to wake up. We stepped into the waiting area, where the lights were softer. A doctor approached, introduced himself and his title, then invited us to sit. He spoke slowly and carefully, choosing each word as if afraid of breaking something fragile hanging between us. He explained that Richard had a rare immune disorder that led to severe neurological complications. Standard treatments were no longer effective. He emphasized that the therapy they were considering was experimental, with no clear precedent and no guarantee of success. I listened, but my mind drifted. I watched Margaret sitting beside me, hands clasped, back straight, eyes fixed on the doctor. She didn't interrupt. She didn't press for answers. She listened like someone who had heard similar explanations too many times, yet still hadn't let go of hope. "We need completely voluntary consent," the doctor said, turning to me. "You have no obligation to do this, and you must understand the risks for both sides." I nodded. I didn't feel cornered. No one looked at me like a commodity. No one said I had to do this. That, more than anything, made me tremble. Then the doctor mentioned the compensation. The number was spoken lightly, professionally, as if it were just an administrative detail, but it landed in my ears like a stone. $500,000. I heard every syllable clearly. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I just sat there staring at my worn shoes, the scuffs on the toes, trying not to laugh or cry at the absurdity of life. $500,000, an amount large enough to completely change the rest of my life. I thought about the small apartment I once had, about not having to line up at the shelter every night, about never again seeing the calculating look in my daughter's eyes whenever money came up. I imagined a small house with sunlit windows, with a table where I could sit and drink my morning coffee without anyone asking, "When are you leaving?" I also thought about Lauren, about what she had said. Someone who no longer earns money. I wondered what kind of look she would give me if she knew that number, but I didn't say it out loud. Not to the doctor, not to Margaret, and certainly not to my daughter. "I need time to think," I said, finally finding my voice. Margaret squeezed my hand gently. "Whatever you decide," she said, "I'm still grateful that you came here." That sentence, no demands, no strings attached, made my chest ache. I realized how accustomed I had become to being asked, to being used, to the point where this simple, genuine respect left me unsettled. On the way back to the shelter, I sat quietly in the car. Hannah didn't ask whether I had decided yet. She just drove, giving me the space I needed. That night, I lay on the familiar bunk bed, staring at the ceiling. The wind whistled through the crack in the window. Everything was the same, but I wasn't. I knew I would agree, not just because of our money, but because for the first time in a long while I had the right to choose, and that choice could give me a life that no longer depended on anyone's unpredictable goodwill. I closed my eyes, the decision already clear in my heart, and I knew one thing for sure. Lauren would not know about this. At least, not yet. 3 days after the hospital meeting, just as I returned to the shelter after a long, dragging afternoon at the public library, the staff on duty called my name from the end of the hallway. "Evelyn Carter, you have a phone call." I froze. Not many people knew I was here. In fact, almost no one did. I hadn't called Lauren. I hadn't called any relatives either. That silence was intentional. A fragile buffer so I could breathe, think, and not be pulled back into the familiar spiral. I picked up the receiver, my heart beating slowly but heavily. "Hello?" There was a very brief pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard my daughter's voice, Lauren's voice, but not the voice I had heard the last time outside the house in the snowstorm. "Mom, it's me." Her voice was softer, more careful, as if every word had been weighed before being spoken. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to react on instinct. I just held the receiver tightly and listened to my own breathing. "I've been looking for you these past few days," Lauren continued. I was worried about you. Worried about me. The words sounded strange. 3 days ago, I was a burden to be removed. 3 days later, I had become someone to worry about. The change came too fast for me to believe it was natural. "I asked around everywhere," she went on, her voice trembling slightly. "I finally found out you're staying at a shelter. Oh my God, Mom, why didn't you call me?" I closed my eyes. I could picture her face clearly as she said that. The face of someone playing concern very well, but I had lived with her long enough to know the difference between genuine worry and purposeful worry. "I'm sorry," Lauren said quickly, as if afraid I would interrupt. "I've been thinking a lot. About that day, about what I said. I was under too much pressure. Everything hit at once." I stayed silent. "The kids miss you so much." She shifted her tone, noticeably softer. "Tommy asks every night where Grandma is, the one who reads to him, and little Emily keeps an empty chair in the living room, saying it's for Grandma when she comes back." I bit my lip, not because I was moved, but because I recognized that familiar tactic. When money couldn't move me, Lauren always knew exactly what to use. "Mom," she said, almost whispering, "no matter what happens, we're still family. Family doesn't abandon each other." Family. That word coming from my daughter's mouth now no longer carried the sacred meaning I once believed in. It sounded like a key, meant to reopen a door she, herself, had slammed shut. "I want you to come home," Lauren said directly after a brief pause. "Home is still your home. I've been thinking these past few days. I can't let you live in a place like that." I opened my eyes and looked at the wall in front of me. Pale beige, a thin crack running along the edge of the ceiling. The silence was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. "I'll rearrange everything," Lauren said. "We'll figure something out. Jason agrees too. You just need to come back." Jason agrees. I remembered my son-in-law sitting on the couch, beer can in hand, eyes glued to the screen, when I dragged my suitcase out of the house. I couldn't recall him looking at me even once that day. "I'll come pick you up," Lauren continued, as if afraid I might refuse. "Even tonight if you want." I took a deep breath. Something in her voice didn't sit right. Too rushed, too eager, as if she were afraid I might disappear again. "Lauren," I said at last. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. "How did you know I was here?" There was a very brief silence on the other end of the line, but it was long enough. I asked around," she replied. "Someone I know, at church." I didn't ask more. I didn't need to press. I had heard what I needed to hear, or rather, what she hadn't said. She knew more than she was admitting. "I heard that you saw a doctor," Lauren said quietly. "Had some tests done?" My heart tightened slightly, but my face didn't change. "At a shelter, everyone has to get a health check," I replied. "That's nothing unusual." "Yeah, I was just asking," she said quickly. Then she rushed back into her familiar tone. "I'm just worried about you. Really." I didn't argue. I didn't expose anything either. I let the silence stretch between us. In that silence, I observed, not my daughter, but my own reaction. I no longer felt the urge to explain, no longer felt the need to be understood. There was only a cold clarity, like a lake frozen over after many days of deep frost. "Can I come pick you up?" Lauren asked again for the third time. "Not for now," I said. "I need more time." "Time?" Her voice wavered. "Time for what? You're staying in a place—" "I'm safe," I cut in, keeping my voice steady. "I have a place to sleep. There are people helping." I heard a sharp breath on the other end. I imagined Lauren pressing her lips together, trying to stay composed. "You're angry with me," she said. It wasn't a question. I thought for a few seconds. "I'm not angry," I replied. "I'm just observing." "Observing what?" Lauren asked, her voice rising. "Observing who truly misses me," I said. "And for what reason?" I heard Lauren swallow. "You're overthinking things again," she said, irritation creeping in. "You always do that. You imagine things." I gave a faint smile. That was the line she always used whenever I got too close to the truth. "Lauren," I said slowly, "I didn't say I'm not coming back. I just said not yet." I hung up before she could respond. I stood there, the receiver still warm in my hand, and felt one thing very clearly. That call didn't come from pure longing. It carried worry, but not worry for me. Worry about something that might be about to happen. That evening, I didn't go to sleep right away. I sat on the bunk bed, opened my small handbag, and took out the old notebook I always carried with me. It had been with me for years, filled with to-do lists, numbers, things I didn't want to forget. I opened to a blank page. For the first time, I didn't write about bills. I didn't write about having to apologize to anyone. I wrote only one line. Say nothing more. Observe. Keep it secret. I didn't know exactly how much Lauren had found out, but I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't looking for me just because of family, and if she thought I was still the woman who would rush back just because of the word family, then this time she had misjudged me. Outside the window, the wind grew stronger. Snow hit the glass with dry, sharp sounds. I pulled the blanket up, lay down, and in that familiar darkness, I began preparing for what came next, not with impulsiveness, but with silence. Silence this time was my weapon. The first treatment was scheduled for Monday morning. I woke up very early, even before the hallway lights came on. Not from anxiety, but because my body was used to waking early after decades of routine. I folded my blanket, got dressed, and sat waiting in silence, listening to the familiar sounds of the shelter slowly waking up. Hannah arrived to pick me up right on time. In the car, she spoke very little, only asking if I was okay, if I needed to stop. I answered briefly. My mind had no room left for wandering thoughts. Everything felt unusually focused, as if I were stepping into a task that simply needed to be done. At the hospital, everything moved quickly but carefully. I was led into a private treatment room, brighter and quieter than I had expected. A reclining chair stood in the center, next to machines with neatly coiled transparent tubes. The familiar disinfectant smell was there, but it no longer overwhelmed me, like it had the first time I entered the ICU. Margaret was already there when I arrived. She stood up immediately, relief flickering in her eyes when she saw me. "Thank you for coming," she said sincerely, without a trace of politeness for show. I nodded, unsure how to respond adequately. As I sat down in the chair, the nurse began preparing. The needle, the tubing, the precise, practiced movements. I looked up at the ceiling, where the white lights shone more gently than I had expected. I breathed evenly, trying to keep my body relaxed. While waiting for the machine to start, I turned my head toward the large glass window separating the treatment room from the ICU outside. Through the glass, I could see Richard's room. He lay there just as before, unmoving. But today, as I looked more closely, a strange feeling crept into me, a vague familiarity with no clear source. I had seen many faces in my life, at work, at Lauren's school, in the old neighborhood, but this wasn't like logically recognizing someone. It was like hearing a melody you haven't heard in years, and before you can remember its name, your heart sinks over something very old. I studied his face through the glass. The silver hair, the features thinned by illness, but still familiar, especially the eyebrows and the straight bridge of his nose. I didn't say anything, telling myself I was imagining things. My mind had been overloaded these past few days. The treatment began. I felt my blood being drawn out, passing through the machine, then returning to my body. It didn't hurt, just a slight fatigue, like after a long workday. Margaret sat nearby, hands resting on her handbag, back straight, eyes never leaving me. She didn't speak, only offering the faintest smiles now and then, as if to reassure me. "Are you feeling uncomfortable?" a nurse asked. "No," I replied. "I'm fine." In that slow, quiet time, thoughts I hadn't named began to surface. Old images, very old, ones I believed had been buried under layers of responsibility and years, suddenly came into focus. A summer afternoon, blazing sunlight, a tall, thin young man with a bright smile leaning against a wooden fence, the sound of cicadas, the smell of dry grass. My heart skipped a beat. Impossible, I told myself. That couldn't be it. But when I looked again at Richard, not the present face on the hospital bed, but the features hidden beneath age, the memory took on clearer shape. I remembered a name I hadn't thought of in a very long time, a name I once promised myself I would forget so I could keep living. Richard. Not Bennett, just Richard. I remembered being 19. I remembered afternoons after school, conversations that stretched on until we lost track of time. I remembered being looked at with eyes full of trust and promise. I remembered a young man telling me, "Someday we'll have the whole world." But the world didn't wait for us. My family went through a crisis back then. My mother became seriously ill. I had to leave school and start working early, stay in our small town while Richard received a scholarship and left. We wrote letters to each other for a while. Then the letters grew fewer. Not because the love faded, but because life pulled each of us in different directions, relentlessly. I never knew what happened to Richard after that. I got married. I had Lauren. I stayed so busy there was no space left for unanswered questions. And over time, that memory was tucked away in a very deep corner, one I no longer touched, until now. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to Margaret. She was looking at me, her eyes gentle but sharp, as if she had noticed the change in me. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. I nodded, but my throat tightened. I didn't know what I should ask, or whether I should ask anything at all. I was afraid of breaking this fragile balance, afraid that if I spoke it out loud, everything would become complicated in ways I couldn't foresee. But Margaret spoke first. "Perhaps Richard feels familiar to you," she said very slowly. Not as a question, but as a gentle confirmation. I looked at her, my heart pounding. "I'm not sure," I replied. "It's just a feeling." Margaret gave a sad smile. "He once told me about someone," she said, "a long time before he met me." I held my breath. "A girl from his old hometown," she continued. "He said she was his first love, the person he never forgot." I felt my hand tremble slightly on the armrest. All the sounds around us seemed to fade away. Only Margaret's voice remained, clear down to every word. "He tried to find you," Margaret said, "many years ago, but he couldn't." I closed my eyes. The years of silence, the letters that were never answered, the questions that were never asked. All of it suddenly came together into a picture I hadn't known I was missing. "You knew about this?" I asked, my voice rough. Margaret nodded. "I knew," she said, "from the very beginning. Richard never hid it from me. He was always honest." There was no jealousy in her voice, no resentment, only the quiet acceptance of someone who had lived long enough to understand that love isn't always about possession. "He loves me," Margaret went on very firmly, "and I know that. But I also know there's a part of his heart that belongs to the past. I never saw that as a threat." Tears spilled over before I could stop them, not from pain, but from a feeling that was too full. A deep, quiet emotion stretched across more than 40 years, finally finding its name. Margaret's kindness left me stunned. She didn't look at me as someone intruding on her marriage. She looked at me as an old piece of her husband's life, one that had unexpectedly returned at a moment no one could have predicted. "Maybe it isn't a coincidence," Margaret said softly, glancing toward the ICU room, "that you're the one who can help him." I looked at Richard, the man who had once been the young man standing by a wooden fence, the man I had loved, then lost, then buried in memory. Now his life was tied to my blood in a way no one could have planned with reason. In that moment, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just about money, not just a deal, not just a chance for me to stand on my own again. This was a circle closing after more than 40 years. A connection I thought was lost had only been sleeping. and for the first time since my life collapsed in that snowstorm, I felt like I was standing in the right place, not as someone being used, but as part of something larger than my own losses. The treatment machine let out a soft beep, signaling the first phase was complete. I opened my eyes and took a deep breath. I knew I would continue, without hesitation, without turning back. Lauren didn't wait long. Just 2 days after the second treatment, while my body was still tired and my mind hadn't fully returned to its normal rhythm, she showed up, without notice, without asking, as if her patience had completely run out. That afternoon was dull and gray. I was sitting in the shelter's common room, halfway through an old book borrowed from the library. Outside the glass doors, the snow had stopped falling, but the sky still felt heavy, as if it wasn't ready for any thaw yet. The front desk worker approached me carefully. "Ms. Evelyn, someone is here to see you. Says she's your daughter." I closed the book and set it on the table. I wasn't surprised. Just a familiar chill settled in, the kind you feel when you know pain is coming but still have to face it. Lauren stood in the lobby wearing the expensive beige coat I remembered clearly, one I had helped pay for 2 years ago as a birthday gift. Light makeup, neatly styled hair. She didn't look like someone searching for her mother after days apart. She looked like someone arriving to deal with unfinished business. "Mom," Lauren said when she saw me. Her voice was no longer soft like it had been on the phone, polite but cold. "Lauren," I replied, nodding. There was no hug, no, "Are you okay?" She glanced around, her eyes sweeping quickly over the worn chairs and peeling paint, as if the very presence of this place made her uncomfortable. "We need to talk," Lauren said flatly, "in private." I followed her outside. It was cold, but not as biting as the day I was thrown out of the house. We stood near the parking lot where the wind rushed through open spaces. Lauren opened her handbag and pulled out a neatly clipped stack of papers. "I don't want to go in circles," she said. "I spoke to a friend who works in the legal field." I looked at the papers in her hand. I didn't ask anything. I waited. "What you're doing," Lauren continued, her voice growing firmer, "is legally complicated. You're involved in an experimental treatment. There's money involved, a lot of money." I looked straight into her eyes. "And you need protection," Lauren said quickly. "You're in a vulnerable state. You just lost your job. You've been emotionally traumatized. It's very easy for someone to take advantage of you." I let out a quiet laugh, not because it was funny, but because I recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone speaking for me, but not for my benefit. "What are you trying to say?" I asked. Lauren held the papers out toward me. "I think it's best if you sign these." I didn't take them. "What are they?" "Temporary power of attorney," Lauren replied. "It allows me to manage financial decisions related to that money on your behalf." I looked at my hands, thin hands, spotted with age, hands that had worked nonstop for 30 years, held her as a child, signed hundreds of documents over a lifetime, and yet had never trembled like this, not from fear, but from a very different kind of pain. "Manage it for me," I repeated slowly. "Yes," Lauren said. "You're not used to handling amounts like that. I have more experience. I just want to make sure everything is handled properly. Taxes, legal responsibility, risks if there are disputes." "You're talking as if I'm no longer capable of understanding things," I said. Lauren sighed, as if I were making things harder than they needed to be. "Mom, don't overreact. This is just a precaution." I looked at her, very carefully, and for the first time I no longer saw my daughter in her eyes. I saw a stranger, someone weighing benefits, calculating moves, trying to control something she believed was slipping away. "Who did you talk to?" I asked. Lauren hesitated for a second. "A lawyer. I don't want you getting into trouble." "Your lawyer," I corrected. She didn't deny it. "Lauren," I said, word by word, "do you remember the last time you asked me what I wanted?" She frowned. "This isn't the time to bring up the past." "For you, maybe not," I replied. "But for me, it is." Lauren grew impatient. "Mom, I'm trying to help you, but if you don't cooperate, things could get complicated." "How complicated?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes noticeably colder. "If necessary, I could request an evaluation of your capacity. You're being influenced by outsiders. People might think you were manipulated." The word landed between us like a blade. Manipulated. I felt something inside me finally snap. Not just now, but the delayed breaking of a relationship that had been cracked for a long time. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly. "You know what I mean," Lauren replied without backing down. "I just want everything clear before it's too late." I nodded, slowly, calmly. So calmly it surprised even me. "So you didn't come here because you miss me," I said. "You came because you're afraid of losing control." "That's not true," Lauren protested immediately, but her voice lacked conviction. "Would you be looking for me," I continued, "if there wasn't that money?" Her silence answered for her. In that moment, I understood very clearly. Lauren no longer saw me as her mother. She saw me as a variable, a risk, an asset that needed to be controlled. I didn't take the papers. I didn't argue further. "You should go," I said. "I need time to think." "You can't make decisions on your own," Lauren snapped. "I'm clear-headed enough to know I'm not signing anything today," I cut in, "and you don't have the right to force me." Lauren stared at me for a few seconds, then shoved the papers back into her bag. "I'm just trying to do the right thing," she said coldly. "Don't regret this later." She turned and walked quickly toward her car. I stood there, the wind cutting against my face, realizing that the greatest pain wasn't being thrown out of the house. It was being treated as someone no longer fit to own her own life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bunk bed, opened my old notebook, and turned to a fresh page. This time, I wrote more than one line. I wrote, "Find a lawyer, independently, not connected to Lauren." The next morning, I asked Hannah to recommend an independent law office. She didn't ask many questions, just looked at me with understanding. Perhaps she'd seen this scenario too many times before. The lawyer's name was Daniel Brooks, around 50 years old. He spoke slowly and clearly. He listened as I told my story, without interrupting, without judging. When I finished, he nodded. "You have every right to protect yourself," he said, "and the first step is making sure no one can use concern as a reason to take away your right to decide." We completed a formal capacity declaration, clear, thorough, no ambiguity. We drafted a temporary will, not because I thought I was about to die, but because I understood that when money appears, so does greed. For the first time in my life, I signed documents not to serve someone else, but to protect myself. When I left the law office, I walked slowly along the sidewalk dusted with thin snow. It was cold, yet my chest felt strangely warm. I had lost many things, but at least I was no longer a woman anyone could step on in the name of family. And for the first time in many years, I knew one thing for certain. I was standing on my own side. The fifth treatment took place on a morning that was unusually quiet. No snow, no rain, just a thin layer of clouds covering the city sky, softening the light that filtered into the hospital like diluted watercolor. I arrived earlier than usual, sat in the familiar waiting room, my small bag in my hands, feeling a calm I hadn't expected. My body had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the treatments. The fatigue was still there, but it no longer frightened me. I understood the light dizziness, the moments of weakness, and the hollow feeling after each blood draw weren't signs of loss, but of a process moving in the right direction. I no longer thought about money when I entered the treatment room. Strangely enough, that was true. I thought about something else, something softer, deeper. Margaret arrived shortly after me. She wore a light gray sweater, her hair neatly tied back. Her eyes looked different that day. Less worn, more hopeful, as if a small light had been lit inside her, bright enough to guide the way. The doctor said some of the numbers look very promising, she said softly as she sat beside me. We'll know more after today. I nodded. I didn't ask anything further. I had learned that some things don't need to be spoken aloud to matter. Margaret's silence then wasn't worry. It was waiting. Inside the treatment room, the machine started up, producing steady, familiar sounds. The nurse checked the readings and took careful notes. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Each time the needle touched my skin, I thought about the years I had endured in silence, not from submission, but because I once believed it was the only way to love. This time, I let my thoughts drift gently. I thought of a long ago afternoon in a small town where Richard and I once sat by the river, talking about big dreams and the voices of people who still believed time was always on their side. I thought of the years I spent being a mother, an employee, the stable woman in everyone's eyes, yet never truly asking myself whether I was happy. When the treatment ended, a nurse hurried into the room, her expression unusual. She looked at Margaret first, then at me. "Please wait a moment," she said. "The doctor wants to see you right away." My heart tightened slightly, not from fear, but from a very strong intuition. Margaret stood up, her hand trembling faintly. I followed her out down the long hallway leading back to the ICU. Each step seemed slower than usual, as if the space itself were stretching to test our patience. Dr. Bennett stood outside the room, his face serious but his eyes bright. He didn't waste time. "There's a response," he said. "A clear one." Margaret raised a hand to cover her mouth. For a few seconds, my mind went completely blank. "What kind of response?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Increased neurological activity," the doctor replied. "We've seen steady improvement over the past 2 days, but this morning it was stronger, much stronger." He opened the door and gestured for us to come in. Richard lay there, still thin, still connected to the familiar machines. But something had changed. I noticed it immediately, even before the doctor said anything more. His eyelids twitched, not a random reflex, a deliberate movement. Margaret gripped my hand tightly. "Richard," she called, her voice breaking. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, his eyes opened very slowly, very heavily, as if he had to pull an entire ruined world out of a long sleep to return. The air in the room froze. "Richard," Margaret whispered, tears spilling over. He looked around, his gaze cloudy, disoriented. Then his eyes stopped, not on Margaret, not on the doctor, but on me. I stood there, my heart pounding. I didn't move. I didn't dare breathe too deeply. His lips moved slightly, no sound. Then again. This time, very softly, very weak, but enough for me to hear. "Evelyn." The entire room erupted. Margaret broke into sobs. The doctor turned, signaling the medical team. Nurses rushed in, equipment was adjusted, rapid medical instructions filled the air. But all those sounds felt distant to me. He said my name, not Margaret, not a mistaken name. It was me, the name no one had spoken in that voice for more than 40 years. I stepped closer, my hands trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the bed. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm here." His eyes focused more clearly, sharper. A very faint, very weak smile appeared, but it was the smile I remembered. The smile of the young man who once said we would have the whole world. "I knew," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "I knew you'd be here." I couldn't hold back my tears, not from pain, not from regret, but from something pure, being seen, being remembered, being called by name, not out of obligation, but out of feeling. The Bennett family stood around the bed. I saw emotional faces, reddened eyes. There was no discomfort, no suspicious glances. No one asked why he had called my name. No one asked me to step back. No one mentioned money. Margaret turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she smiled. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for bringing him back." I shook my head. "No," I said. "We did this together." Over the next few hours, Richard became more alert. He didn't speak much. Each sentence required enormous effort. But he held Margaret's hand. He looked at his children. He looked at me, as if trying to memorize every detail, afraid that if he blinked, it would all disappear. No one asked anything of me. No one asked how long I would continue treatment, how I would receive the money, or what I planned to do next. No one mentioned responsibility or obligation. I wasn't placed in a position where I had to repay anything. For the first time in a very long while, I was simply present, and that was enough. That evening, I sat alone in my small room at the shelter, looking out the window. Streetlights cast a golden glow over the thin layer of snow. I thought about Lauren, about the stack of power of attorney papers, about the way she had looked at me as something that needed to be controlled. Then I thought about Margaret, about the way she held my hand, about how the Bennett family stood around the hospital bed without asking a single question about me except whether I was okay. And I understood. Real family doesn't come from blood or beautiful words. It comes from respect, from not treating someone as a means to get what you want. I had lived too long in a family where love always came with conditions. And now, standing before an undeniable miracle, I finally realized how many years I had confused obligation with love. Richard had woken up, but the one who truly awakened was me. The news that Lauren had lost her house reached me on a morning that seemed perfectly ordinary. I was sitting in the small room at the shelter, organizing a few personal belongings, when my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering, no longer rushing the way I used to. "Hello?" Lauren's voice came through immediately, hoarse and urgent. No small talk, no awkward greetings. "Mom, I don't have a place to live anymore." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. I had sensed this would happen. I just hadn't expected it to come so soon. "The bank foreclosed on the house," Lauren went on, her breathing rapid. "Jason, he really lost his job this time. For real. We can't manage anymore." I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. Not as punishment, but to hear everything my daughter was trying to say and everything she wasn't. "Mom," Lauren lowered her voice, sounding weaker. "I know I was wrong. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But now we really need you." The sentence fell into the familiar space between us, just as it had so many times before. The only difference was that this time, I didn't rush to fill it. "What about the kids?" I asked evenly. Lauren seemed ready for that question. "Tommy and Emily, they're panicking, Mom. They don't understand what's happening. Tommy cries all night. Emily keeps asking when we can go back to the old house." My throat tightened. Images of the two children came sharply into focus. Our evenings reading together, the mornings I made breakfast before work. They weren't at fault. I knew that better than anyone. "Mom," Lauren said, her voice beginning to tremble deliberately, "you can't abandon your grandchildren. No matter what, you're still their grandmother." Grandmother. Not mother, not family. A role. One I was reminded of whenever emotions needed to be stirred. "What do you want?" I asked. Lauren was silent for a few seconds, then spoke quickly, as if afraid I might change my mind. "Just help us temporarily. You're in a better position now. Just for a while. Until we get back on our feet." I opened my eyes and looked out the window. Pale sunlight. Most of the snow on the sidewalk had melted, leaving gray streaks of water. Winter was retreating, but melting doesn't always bring relief. "Lauren," I said slowly, "do you remember the last time you told me you couldn't support another person who doesn't earn money?" Her voice stalled. "Mom." I already apologized. "Did you apologize because you were afraid of losing money," I continued, "or because you truly understood what you did?" Lauren hesitated. "I don't know how to say it so you'll believe me." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I believe you're scared," I said. "I believe you're desperate, but I don't believe you've changed." "I have changed," Lauren said loudly, almost pleading. "Can't you see? I'm calling you. I'm begging." "Begging," I repeated. "Or bargaining." There was no immediate answer. I heard Lauren breathe heavily, then her voice shifted to a different tone, softer, lower. "Mom," she said, "you can endure this, but the kids can't. Do you want them sleeping on someone else's couch? Growing up, feeling abandoned?" That sentence struck the deepest part of me. I felt a pain I knew all too well. The pain of a woman who once sacrificed everything so her child wouldn't lack anything. It pulled me back years, to the days I worked 2 jobs, to the times I skipped meals so Lauren could pay tuition. I stayed silent for a long time, not because I was wavering, but because I needed to be sure where I stood. "Lauren," I said finally, "do you know why I didn't come back home that day?" "Because you were angry," she answered quickly. "No," I said, "because I realized something." "What?" "That if I keep rescuing you from the consequences of your choices," I said clearly, word by word, "you will never learn how to take responsibility for your own life." "But this time is different," Lauren pleaded. "This time it's for the kids." I closed my eyes. Images of Tommy and Emily rose again. My heart hurt, truly hurt. But the pain no longer disoriented me. "I love my grandchildren," I said. "That hasn't changed." Then, "But I won't return to the role of unconditional rescuer," I cut in. "Not for you, not for anyone." "So you're going to let them be homeless?" Lauren snapped, anger creeping in. "No," I replied. "You and Jason are adults. You can find solutions. A smaller apartment, different jobs, community assistance. Many families have had to do the same." "But you have money," Lauren blurted out. "You could fix everything with just one check." "And then what?" I asked. "Then you'd make decisions for me again. Calculate how much I'm worth. Remind me that family only exists when it's convenient." Lauren fell silent. I heard her crying, not an outburst, but tight, frustrated sobs. "You're cruel," Lauren said. "You've changed." I opened my eyes and looked straight at the light outside the window. "Yes," I said, "I have changed." "Before, you would never say no," Lauren went on. "No matter what, you would help." "Before, I was afraid of being abandoned," I replied. "Now I'm not." The words rang clearly inside me, not as a declaration, but as an accepted truth. "I don't hate you," I added, my voice softening, "but I can't keep sacrificing myself so you can feel secure." "Then who are you choosing?" Lauren asked, her voice turning cold. "Those strangers?" I gave a sad smile. "I'm choosing myself." The call ended quietly. No goodbye. Just a long pause, and then Lauren hung up. I set the phone down on the table. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten the way I had expected. There was real sadness. Sadness for my daughter, for my grandchildren, for what could have been different. But beneath that sadness was a steadiness I had never known before. For the first time in my life, I said no without guilt, without feeling selfish, without feeling ungrateful, without feeling like a bad mother. I simply felt like a woman who had lived long enough to understand that love does not mean self-destruction. That evening, I went to the hospital to visit Richard. He was speaking more. His voice was still weak, but his eyes were bright. Margaret sat beside the bed, holding his hand. They looked at me as I entered, smiling without conditions. "Are you okay?" Margaret asked. I nodded. "I am." And it wasn't a polite answer. I didn't turn back. And for the first time, I knew for sure I was moving in the right direction. I signed the papers to buy my house on an early spring morning, when the city still held scattered patches of old snow that hadn't fully melted yet. The air was cold, but the sunlight was different. No longer the heavy gray of winter, but a pale, clear light, like a reminder that everything can begin again. The house wasn't big. 2 small bedrooms, a living room just large enough for a sofa and a bookshelf, and a bright kitchen with a window looking out onto the backyard. Nothing luxurious, no white picket fence like in the movies. But when I stepped across the threshold for the first time with the keys in my hand, I knew with absolute clarity this was my home, not my daughter's house, not a place I was staying temporarily, not a roof tied to conditions, just a home, mine. I stood for a long time in the empty living room, listening to the soft echo of my footsteps on the newly polished wooden floor. The sound made me smile. For years, I had learned to walk quietly, to take up as little space as possible, to exist in a way that wouldn't inconvenience anyone. And now, my footsteps were allowed to be heard, without apology, without hesitation. I bought the house about a 10-minute walk from Richard and Margaret's place, not because I wanted to cling to them, but because I valued the right kind of closeness. Near, but not merged. Connected, but not dependent. Margaret helped me choose the curtains. Richard, once his health had improved, planted a few flower bushes with me in the front yard. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. Some things once acknowledged don't need to be repeated. I moved into the new house quietly. No housewarming party, no announcements. Just Hannah helping me carry a few boxes and Margaret bringing over a tray of still warm pastries. "Welcome home," she said, setting the tray on the kitchen counter. I stood there, looking at the kitchen glowing in the afternoon light, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt the meaning of those words. In the days that followed, I began arranging my life according to my own rhythm. I woke up when I wanted. I made coffee the way I liked it, unhurried, without preparing it for anyone else. I read in the mornings, took walks in the afternoons, and cooked simple meals just to nourish myself, not to prove anything. Money, the thing that had once been the greatest anxiety of my life, was no longer the center of every thought. I used it carefully with planning, but I didn't let it control me. I paid off the small remaining debts from before. I bought better health insurance. I set aside some for short trips I had always told myself were unnecessary. But the most important thing wasn't the house or financial stability. It was a decision I made one quiet afternoon while sitting alone in my new living room. I opened my old notebook, the one that had followed me through my worst days, and wrote a new heading: a fund for older women. The idea didn't come from ambition or a desire for praise. It came from the image of Rosa, the woman I had met at the shelter, from the faces I had seen on cold nights, women who had once had families, once worked their whole lives, and then one day were treated as expendable. I knew that feeling. I had lived it. My fund wasn't large. I didn't build a grand organization. I simply created a small fund, enough to help a few women with rental deposits, enough to cover a few legal consultations, enough to give them time to stand on their feet before being swept away. I named it Second Dawn, not because I thought I was saving anyone, but because I believed no one should be denied the chance to begin again just because they had already lived too many years. I met those women in my kitchen. We drank tea. We talked. Not as victims, but as people who had lived long enough to understand that life can be cruel. But it doesn't always have to end in the worst way. Some cried. Some were angry. Some stayed silent for a long time before daring to tell their stories. I didn't fix them. I just listened. And sometimes that was enough. Lauren didn't call me anymore. News about her reached me through others, through a distant relative, through bits of overheard conversation. She and Jason moved into a smaller apartment. The kids changed schools. Their life was difficult, but it went on. I thought about my grandchildren often. I wrote them short letters. No blame, no explanations, just telling them about Grandma's little front garden, about the stray cat I fed every morning, about afternoons spent reading on the porch. I didn't know whether Lauren gave them the letters or not, but I kept writing, not to pull them back, but to keep my love from turning into resentment. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants in the yard, Richard stopped by. He walked slowly, but his posture was steadier. We sat on the front steps, watching the sun sink behind the roof across the street. "Do you regret anything?" he asked softly. I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said. "I regret living too long out of obligation." Richard nodded as if he had already understood. "But you don't do that anymore." "No," I said. "I don't. I don't live to play the role of the perfect mother. I don't live to be recognized as a self-sacrificing woman. I don't live to keep the peace by staying silent. I live for myself. I choose the meals I like. I choose the house I live in. I choose to help when I want to, not when I'm pressured. I choose to say yes and no based on clarity, not on the fear of being abandoned. My new life isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, but it's steady, like a tree that has taken deep root after a storm. And for the first time, I don't feel the need to apologize for that. I don't run from the past. I don't deny the years I sacrificed. I simply put them where they belong, behind me. Ahead of me is a life I chose for myself. Many years have passed since the winter day I stood on my daughter's porch, snow covering my shoulders, the door slamming shut behind me like a cold verdict. Time didn't erase that memory, but it changed its shape. No longer sharp like broken glass, it became a faded scar, a reminder that I was once hurt and that I survived. My life now is peaceful in a very ordinary way. Every morning, I wake up in my small house and open the window to let sunlight into the kitchen. I make coffee, water the plants on the porch, listen to birds perched on the wooden fence. There's no packed schedule, no one I need to prove anything to. I read, walk, cook, and occasionally drive to visit Margaret and Richard. Visits without obligation, only voluntary presence. Richard has nearly fully recovered. We sit on their porch on long afternoons, talking about small things, the weather, a good book, the morning news. Sometimes we sit in silence for a long time, and that silence no longer makes me feel lacking. It's full in its own way. We don't try to make up for the past. We let it rest, like an old photograph kept in a drawer, still there, but not something we need to take out every day. I still think about Lauren, not with anger, but with a mature sadness. I understand that she carries her own fears, fear of scarcity, fear of failure, fear of losing control. But I no longer allow those fears to decide my life. I love her the way a mother learns to love after many losses, with love, but with boundaries. I still love my grandchildren. That has never changed. I keep photos of Tommy and Emily on my bookshelf, 2 gap-toothed smiles, 2 little faces that used to press against my shoulder every night. I send birthday gifts regularly. I write letters, not long, not heavy, just lines about the garden, about the cat I named Hope, about simple things I want them to know. Grandma is still here, still loving, but no longer hurting herself to be loved in return. Those boundaries aren't easy to keep. Some nights I lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'm selfish. But every time that question surfaces, I remember the woman I once was, the one who did everything for her child and was then erased from her child's life like an unnecessary expense. On my first night at the shelter, I promised myself I would never let anyone step on me again. And I've kept that promise, not with bitterness, but with clarity. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves began to turn yellow and a cool breeze passed over the porch, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I answered with the calm habit formed over the years. "Grandma?" A small, hesitant voice said. My heart stuttered. I knew that voice even before my mind could catch up. "Tommy?" I asked, my voice trembling just slightly. "Yes," he said. I found your number in the contacts. Mom doesn't know." I sat down in the chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." That one sentence dissolved every defense I had. I closed my eyes, letting the autumn wind brush my cheek and listen to every breath of the grandchild I had missed every day. We didn't talk long, about his new school, about math, which he didn't like, about Grandma's cat. He didn't ask why I didn't come back to live with the family. He didn't blame me. He was simply there. And that presence planted a small but steady hope inside me. After the call, I sat on the porch for a long time. Leaves drifted down onto the walkway. I understood then that seeds of love never disappear completely. They just need time and soil that isn't trampled by obligation or guilt to grow again. I don't regret it. I don't regret saying no. I don't regret choosing myself. If there's anything I regret, it's only that I didn't do it sooner. But life doesn't give us a rewind button. It only gives us choices from this moment forward. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't hurt anyone to prove I was right. I lived better, and that was my choice and the only answer I needed. I built a life where I am respected, where help is voluntary, where family is not a chain. Now, looking back, I understand that I lost one family, a family where love came with conditions. But I found myself again, the woman who has the right to choose how to live, how to love, and how to move forward. I'm telling this story not to blame anyone. I'm I'm telling it to remember that sometimes leaving isn't running away, it's returning to yourself. And maybe, somewhere in this story, you see a part of yourself too. What city are you listening from? If you've ever been treated like a burden, please remember, your worth does not live in anyone else's wallet or decisions. Leave a comment. I truly want to know your story. Thank you for staying until the end. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please like, subscribe, and stay with me. I still have so much more to tell.